Chapter 383.
The scholarly man sitting at the head of the table was very young. He had just been driven out by the steward of the King of Shu's mansion and had lost a lot of face. However, at this time, most people in the hall would not mock or ridicule him because of that, because the person sitting opposite him and chatting happily with him was the Honorable King of Shu.
The conversation between Li Yi and the King of Shu was actually not as chatting happily as most people thought. There was really nothing to talk about with a stranger. Li Yi was not in a good mood tonight. The King of Shu obviously did not have the charisma of his father. Of course, another reason might be that there were a few dishes and a bowl of plain porridge on the table. The location was not the garden of Prince Ning's mansion, and the person opposite him was not the middle-aged high-ranking official, whom Li Yi had a good impression of at their first meeting. "Your Highness, you flatter me." Li Yi had a faint smile on his face, but he kept a distance from the king. The King of Shu's intention to rope him in could not be more obvious.
However, Li Yi did not expect that the way to rope him in was by praising him, saying that he was a young hero, a pillar of the country, and that if he succeeded the throne in the future, he would be heavily rewarded, saying that he was the blessing of the emperor, the blessing of the Jing kingdom, and so on. There were some words that even Li Yi himself felt a little embarrassed to hear.
Perhaps the King of Shu was tired of praising and thirsty. Finally, he took a sip of tea, looked at Li Yi, and asked with a smile. "General Su said in the letter that the soldiers of the Jing kingdom are invincible on the battlefield because of Tianfa. They can kill enemies and destroy cities. I wonder what this Tianfa is. How can it be so powerful? I heard that this Tianfa was created by Li Xianzi. I wonder if Li Xianzi can answer I's doubts?"
The King of Shu said with a smile, and then his eyes fell on Li Yi.
"Didn't His Majesty tell the King of Shu about it?" Li Yi asked curiously. The King of Shu shook his head and said, "My father didn't mention it." Li Yi thought for a moment and quickly realized that although the name Sky Law had been circulating in the capital, it was not very popular. The higher-ups must have deliberately controlled the news in this area. However, even the King of Shu, the prince who was about to become the crown prince, did not know what heaven's punishment was. It seemed that the old emperor had kept this matter a secret to the extreme. This matter was too sensitive. Li Yi didn't want to test the old emperor's bottom line.
He looked at the King of Shu and said, "The matter of heaven's punishment is not a trivial matter.
Since His Majesty didn't tell Your Highness, it means that Your Highness can't know about it. Moreover, His Majesty has issued an extremely strict gag order so." Li Yi did not finish his words. He believed that the King of Shu would definitely understand what he meant. Sure enough, the King of Shu was startled for a moment before he immediately smiled and said, "Since father has given the order, I have been rude." The King of Shu laughed and drank the wine in his cup in one gulp. A trace of displeasure flashed across his face, which was covered by his sleeve. The son of Chong'an County? Not far away, Cui Qingyu played with the empty wine cup in his hand. After glancing in a certain direction, he seemed to unconsciously murmur, "Your Highness's attitude towards him is really beyond my expectations." Chen Lijun's gaze paused there for a moment before he turned his head and said while shaking his head, "It was just a county. Even if he had some ability, there were many capable people under the King of Shu's command." Qin Yu's gaze did not move away from that direction. He nodded and said, "It's really unexpected to meet such a woman tonight." Cui Qingyu and Chen Lijun glanced at him at the same time. With such a grandson, Prime Minister Qin's clean reputation should have been almost destroyed. He had a lot of wives and concubines in his residence, but he liked married women. As long as he liked a woman, he would use all means to get her. At that time, Qin Yu did not care about his relatives. Anyone who tried to stop him was his enemy. He even got his hands on an uncle's concubine. When that uncle went to complain to Prime Minister Qin, he was kicked out of the room by Qin Yu. From then on, Madman Qin's name spread. Although he was grounded by Prime Minister Qin for 2 months, he still did whatever he wanted after he was released. Regarding this, the Qin family could do nothing about it. Because he was the only male descendant of the Qin family, in order to not let this family line end, as long as he didn't cause any scandals in the family, even Prime Minister Qin turned a blind eye to his actions. It was unknown how many memorials to impeach Qin Yu had been secretly suppressed. Chen Lijun looked at him and asked, "Aren't you only interested in married women? When did your taste change?" Hearing this, Qin Yu waved his hand and said, "I've eaten too many salty things. Occasionally, I have to change to something sweet. What do you know? The two shook their heads and no longer cared about Qin Yu. They came to the prince's mansion tonight to discuss important matters, which represented the wishes of the family. His Majesty's attitude towards appointing a crown prince was not clear, and the joint memorial submitted by several ministers had been suppressed. A few days ago, the plan to unite with the Wang family by marriage had also failed. They did not win the support of the Wang family of Jiangyi, which was not good news for the king of Shu. In order to deal with the unexpected situation in the future, they had to make sufficient preparations.
The two talked in secret for a while, and saw the king of Shu stand up and walk over.
When the king of Shu sat down, Cui Qingyu looked at him and asked, "Is that person really that important?" "It's always good if we can win over the person that my father values." The king of Shu's face did not look very good. Just now, his intention to win over Li Xianzi was very obvious, but Li Xianzi kept changing the topic. No matter what promises he made, he did not show any willingness to be loyal. He did not know how to appreciate favors. Seeing the king of Shu's face, Cui Qingyu and the other two were slightly surprised. Obviously, the king of Shu did not get the result he wanted. He was actually rejected by the other party? How could this be possible? He was the king of Shu, not the king of Wei, Qi, or Jin. He was the king of Shu who was most likely to ascend to the throne. Compared to Qin Yu, he was the real lunatic. "You don't like the king of Shu?" Lu Rui sat opposite Li Yi and looked up at him. Li Yi glanced at her and said, "Of course I don't like the king of Shu. I like your sister, and I also like silver. Gold is fine too." Lu Rui did not look at him again, nor did she speak again. "We're going to be bandits in the future, so it's better not to get involved in this kind of thing," Li Yi added. He did not really like or dislike the king of Shu, but he did not want to get involved in his affairs. Since ancient times, those who got involved in such things did not end up well.
Although the king of Shu was the favorite to win the championship, if he were to bet on him, he would probably get a lifetime of wealth.
The opportunity that he had just turned down was something that countless people dreamed of. However, deep down, Li Yi was not optimistic about the king of Shu.
Although the current emperor was unwell, after several interactions with him, Shaoning had inadvertently revealed, and Li Yi had sensed from this country, the seemingly kind-looking middle-aged man was wise and far-sighted. He was a very qualified emperor. How could a qualified emperor leave the position of the Eastern Palace empty when his own life was about to end? Everyone in the world thought that this position should belong to the king of Shu, and so did the king of Shu and countless courtiers. However, this position did not belong to him yet, so it would never belong to him. It was not the king of Shu's turn to be the emperor, and of course, it was not his turn to sit on the throne. Since it had nothing to do with him, he would just let it go. Of course, apart from this, there were many other reasons. For example, the king of Shu was not handsome enough, and he did not like the clothes he wore today. Also, why was he called the king of Shu instead of Wei or Qi? Calling him Prince Jin sounded better than the king of Shu. He really did not like the two words, king of Shu. It was not an exaggeration at all. He could give 10,000 reasons like this. Weren't these reasons enough? Chapter 384. I'm curious. What does your highness see in Li Yi? Chen Lijun's eyes paused in a certain direction for a moment. Then he turned his head and looked at the king of Shu with some doubts. Cui Qingyu also looked up at the king of Shu. He also had doubts about this matter. If Qin Haodong only knew how to compose a few poems and write a few articles, the king of Shu wouldn't even pay much attention to him. Just because his majesty valued him was not enough. Divine punishment, the king of Shu said in a low voice after a moment of silence. Chen Lijun and Cui Qingyu's pupils shrank slightly. They couldn't help but stand up straight. Him. For some reason, the influence of the two words, divine punishment, did not spread in the capital city and was limited to some high-level officials. However, with their status, how could they not have heard of it? It was just that they didn't know the specific details of this matter. Even the elders and their families only knew that there was a heavily guarded place outside the city, which seemed to be related to divine punishment. His Majesty had firmly controlled this matter, so others knew very little about it. So what? What kind of person is your highness? He will know about this sooner or later. Qin Yu withdrew his gaze and said, "In fact, your highness was a little reckless just now. Your highness still doesn't know about this matter, which means it's not time for your highness to know about it. If you act too impatient,
You may arouse His Majesty's dissatisfaction. Even if you really know the secret of divine punishment, you will lose more than you gain. Chen Lijun and Cui Chengyu nodded. Although Qin Yu didn't do proper work, it didn't mean that he was a complete playboy.
On the contrary, his insight into things was often the sharpest among them.
The Qin family was not only noble. Marquis Qin was also the right chief minister and a veteran of 3 dynasties. The king of Shu couldn't get to where he was today without the advice of the Qin family.
That makes sense.
The king of Shu nodded. Qin Yu's words were almost exactly the same as Li Xianzi's. The most important reason he wanted to win over Li Xianzi was to get divine punishment. Now, after Qin Yu's reminder, he knew that he couldn't touch it now. When he could really touch it, Li Xianzi wouldn't be of much use to him. You guys talk first. I'll go over for a while. A mysterious smile appeared on Qin Yu's face.
After saying a few words to the 3 of them, he got up and walked off in a certain direction.
After the king of Shu and the other 2 turned around to take a look, a strange expression appeared on their faces. Mississippi Lu did not speak. She felt a little bored sitting there.
Her conversation with the king of Shu had ended on a sour note. Although she did not know if the king of Shu was a petty person who bore grudges, it was fortunate that she would not have to attend those messy banquets in the king of Shu's mansion in the future. Her time was precious and could not be wasted on these things. Just as she was thinking of an excuse to leave again, a figure suddenly appeared beside her. It was young Duke Qin. He looked at Mississippi Lu with a smile and asked, "May I know your surname, miss?" Li Yi didn't know whether he should admire his foresight or his courage. When it came to this kind of thing, Mississippi Lu never cared about the little duke or the prince. The expression on her face did not change at all because of these words. She did not even lift her eyelids. Seeing this, the smile on Qin Yu's face became even brighter. He continued, "Let me introduce myself. My name is Qin Yu. The current chief minister is my grandfather. I wonder if I have the honor to buy you a drink?" As expected, young Duke Qin likes that girl. What a pity, what a pity. Such a stunning beauty can't escape such a fate. That county magistrate Li really shouldn't have brought the girl here today. Doesn't he know that young Duke Qin will definitely be at the banquet of the king of Shu? Because of young Duke Qin's reputation, no one dared to say anything. Only in a remote corner far away, there were people whispering. Other than their small area, no one would be able to hear them. However, Li Yi knew that Mississippi Lu must be able to hear it because he could vaguely hear it himself. Then he began to feel a little uncomfortable. This young Duke Qin in front of him looked well dressed, but he was actually a beast inside. No, some of the things he did were even worse than a beast. Who knew what this beast was thinking in his heart when he was facing Miss Lu? Not to mention talking, Li Yi felt that he was at a disadvantage even if he just glanced at Mississippi Lu. Cui Yenxin, who was standing in the corner, still had a stunned expression on his face. He did not expect that things would turn around so quickly. Young Duke Qin likes that girl? Cui Yenxin's face quickly showed an expression of extreme surprise and pleasure. Everyone in the capital city knew about the relationship between young Duke Qin and the king of Shu. In this matter, he would definitely not help the guy from Qing and Prefecture. Then, things would become much more interesting. If it were not for the fact that they were still at the banquet, Cui Yenxin would really want to look up to the sky and laugh. "Surnamed Li, you deserve this. Steward, please inform His Royal Highness the King of Shu that we still have some matters to attend to at home. We will take our leave first." Li Yi stood up and said to the steward standing at the side. Steward Su nodded his head in shock. He looked at the young man whom he had just personally invited in and thought to himself, "The King of Shu is right there. If you want to say it, go and say it yourself." However, just as he was thinking about this, the 2 people whom he had just invited back had already stood up from their seats and walked out of the door. The King of Shu's expression did not look too good. Under the watchful eyes of the crowd, they had directly left without saying a word. Furthermore, he had personally welcomed them just now. What would the crowd think of him? However, if he stood out now, it would be making a big fuss over a minor issue. He snorted coldly and did not say anything. "This lady, you won't even give me this face, will you?" Just as Li Yi was about to walk out of the door, a voice suddenly came from behind him. A hand reached out from behind him and reached out to grab Mississippi Lu's shoulder. Qin Yu had a faint smile on his face.
Those who were familiar with him would feel a chill run down their spines when they saw this expression. However, the smile on his face quickly disappeared. This was because before his hand could touch the woman's shoulder, a hand reached out from the side and grabbed his wrist. That person was so fast that Qin Yu did not even see it clearly. A skinny man behind Qin Yu saw it clearly. A trace of surprise appeared on his face. He moved slightly and stood behind Qin Yu. Qin Yu's smile disappeared. He narrowed his eyes and looked at Li Xianzi. He was no longer as enthusiastic as when they first met.
He said indifferently, "If you don't let go of him after 3 breaths, I will chop off his hand."
The skinny man behind Qin Yu nodded expressionlessly.
One of his hands was already on the hilt of the saber at his waist.
The king of Shu faintly heard his voice. He frowned slightly, stood up from his seat, and walked out. This was the king of Shu's mansion. Qin Yu could make a scene, but he could not go too far. If Li Xianzi's hand was really chopped off here, it would be a troublesome matter for him.
One reason was that it would be difficult to explain it to the emperor.
Another reason was that he could not explain it to Mingzu. Even if he became the crown prince, he would not be able to get away with it. When everyone heard Qin Yu's words, they could not help but shiver. Crazy Qin was indeed Crazy Qin. This was the king of Shu's mansion. Under the watchful eyes of the public, he chopped off someone's hand and foot without saying a word. In the entire capital city, he was probably the only one who dared to do this. After saying that, Qin Yu automatically ignored Li Yi. His face regained a kind smile.
He looked at the beautiful woman in front of him and said, "Goo." He only said one word before he stopped abruptly. The expression on his face was very stiff, and a trace of disbelief appeared in his eyes.
This was because an ice-cold long sword was placed on his neck. This sword was very sharp. Qin Yu could even feel a line of blood being drawn on his neck. At this moment, he really felt that his life and death were only a matter of seconds.
The woman looked at him with an emotionless gaze.
She only said one word. Her voice seemed to come from the depths of hell, turning to ice when it touched the ground.
"Get lost."
That was what the woman said. Qin Yu's face was completely pale. He felt that his neck was a little wet and hot, probably because of blood flowing out.
The pupils of the thin man behind him suddenly shrank. He held the hilt of his sword with one hand, but he did not have the strength to pull it out.
Fast, too fast. It was a speed that exceeded his imagination.
The two of them had not exchanged blows, but he already knew very well that this young woman's strength was much, much higher than his. This was also one of the reasons why he did not have the courage to pull out his sword.
His heart was instantly filled with endless fear.
With the power that she had displayed with her sword just now, it would only take a thought for her to kill the heir to the High Duke.
Even His Highness the King of Shu would be in danger.
If she was willing. The thin man could not help but curse in his heart.
What were the people of the King of Shu doing? How could they allow such an expert to bring a weapon in? Quickly let go of the little duke. Otherwise, no matter who you are, you will not be able to bear the consequences. The thin man said in a low voice. If anything happened to the little Duke Qin, not only would the other party not be able to bear the consequences, even he himself would not be able to bear it. He and his family would all be responsible for this. Of course, if anything happened to His Highness the King of Shu, even more people would be implicated. Time seemed to stop for a moment. Lu Rui frowned, as if he was thinking about whether to put down his sword, or to kill him and then kill his way out with Li Yi. Not long after, Qin Yu and the thin man only saw a flash of white light before their eyes. The woman's sword had already been sheathed again. Interesting, interesting. Although Qin Yu's face was pale, a strange smile appeared on his face. He reached out and wiped his neck, licking the blood off his fingers with his tongue. A bloodthirsty light seemed to flash in his eyes. What's going on? From the moment Mississippi Lu drew her sword to the moment she sheathed it, only a very short time had passed. When the King of Shu walked out, he only saw the tense atmosphere outside. A dozen guards of the king's mansion surrounded the two people. The thin man behind Qin Yu looked as if he was facing a formidable enemy. As for Qin Yu, the King of Shu knew from his expression that he was about to go crazy again. Your Highness, this woman wanted to assassinate the little Duke Qin just now.
A guard of the king's mansion immediately came forward and reported.
This woman is extremely dangerous. Your Highness, please stay away for the time being. For them, the safety of the King of Shu was the most important. At this time, Several people immediately stood in front of the king of Shu and looked warily at the woman holding the sword. The king of Shu was shocked when he saw the bloodline on Qin Yu's neck and the sword in the woman's hand. Someone actually dared to kill the eldest grandson of the Qin's mansion with a sword in the king of Shu's mansion? And this person was the woman beside Li Xianzi. The people in the hall could no longer sit still and rushed to the door. After realizing what had just happened, their faces were filled with shock. Although countless people in the capital wanted to kill Qin Yu with a sword, it was the first time that someone dared to do so. They wanted to curry favor with the king of Shu because of his current status and future potential, but it didn't mean that they had to kneel down and lick Qin Yu's boots. As for Li Xianzi and that heroine, let's call her heroine for the time being, they still had some respect in their hearts. After all, what they thought was one thing, and what they did was another. They admired Li Xianzi for having the courage to put a sword against Qin Yu's neck. After the admiration, of course, they felt pity. This kind of pity was for what they would face. They committed murder in the prince's mansion and attempted to assassinate little Duke Qin. Under the eyes of the king of Shu, if this crime was confirmed, what awaited them would be terrible things. Just as they were thinking about this, they heard a faint voice with a hint of inquiry in it. Li Yi turned his head to look at the king of Shu and asked, "Your Highness, can we go now?" For a moment, everyone couldn't come back to their senses. Couldn't Li Xianzi see the situation in front of him clearly? Just now, the woman put a long sword on the little Duke Qin's neck. It would be more difficult for them to leave here tonight than to ascend to heaven. The king of Shu was a little stunned at first, and then he was a little puzzled. He wondered why Li Xianzi said these words just now. "Do you think it's appropriate to let you leave like this?" It seemed that because of the injury on his neck, Qin Yu tilted his head. Although he was smiling, he looked quite funny. "I think it's quite appropriate." Li Yi looked at him and said. Then he looked at the king of Shu and asked, "Your Highness, what do you think?" The doubt and astonishment on the king of Shu's face disappeared. He suddenly realized that Li Xianzi seemed to be a little different from before. The king of Shu looked at him and said indifferently, "You hurt someone in the prince's mansion with a sword. I'm afraid I can't let you leave so easily." If Li Xianzi had given him a satisfactory answer, the king of Shu wouldn't have minded intervening at this time. Qin Yu was a lunatic, but even if he was really crazy, he couldn't completely ignore the king of Shu's opinion. Unfortunately, the king of Shu didn't intend to do this for an unrelated person. He pointed to the guards of the prince's mansion and said, "Men, arrest them and hand them over to the authorities." This was the capital city. Even though he was a king, he didn't have the authority to arrest people. It was fine if they did it secretly. However, under the watchful eyes of so many people, a viscount was involved. Everything had to be done according to the law. After receiving the king's order, the guards of the prince's mansion were about to step forward when they suddenly heard the sound of a sword. When they saw the woman draw her sword again, they immediately became vigilant. The king of Shu narrowed his eyes and said coldly, "Do you still want to assassinate I?" Chapter 385. Don't be impulsive. Even a prince has to be reasonable. Li Yi turned around, took the sword from Mississippi Lu's hand, put it back into the scabbard, and said while shaking his head, "Reasonable." Many people sighed in their hearts. They were now in the king of Shu's mansion. Li Xianzi was too naive to reason with the king of Shu and madman Qin. Li Yi saw a certain emotion in the depths of second young Miss Lu's eyes, and thought to himself that it was fortunate that he had detected it early. Otherwise, with second young Miss Lu's personality, if it weren't for him today, whatever little Duke Qin, the king of Shu, would have had his head kicked around like a ball. Just the guards that the king of Shu's household had displayed on the surface weren't even fit to carry the shoes of Li Xian's heir's household. It would be a wonder if they could withstand a furious second young Miss Lu. Of course, he couldn't let Rui do that. After killing two bigwigs at once, it would be inconvenient for him to run away at night. Moreover, the king of Shu could be unreasonable to others, but he couldn't be unreasonable to him. At least not before the king of Shu became the emperor. Now he was no longer the man who was kidnapped by Mississippi Lu to the mountain without any human rights. Half a year's time was neither short nor long, but it was enough to change a lot of things. Sometimes, even he felt surprised. When he looked back, he realized that he had gained a lot of things. At least, he wouldn't be bullied at will anymore. Not by young Duke Qin, not by king of Shu. Li Yi put the sword back in Miss Lu's hand, turned around, looked at the king of Shu, and said, Everyone saw it clearly just now. It seems that the one who wanted to commit murder was little Duke Qin. We were just defending ourselves. I'm afraid this is not enough to assassinate him, right? Everyone could only sigh at the naive Li Xianzi. What young Duke Qin wanted to do was one thing, and what Li Xianzi wanted to do was another. How could they be the same? Young Duke Qin had the support of the king of Shu and a grandfather who was the prime minister. What about Li Xianzi? The king of Shu said lightly. Qin Yu was just saying. He didn't really chop off your hand. However, you injured him. Even if it's not an assassination, it's still a crime. Li Yi looked at him and asked, Your Highness means that if someone wants to assassinate Your Highness, they must first chop off one of Your Highness's hands before it can be considered an assassination? The king of Shu opened his mouth, but he couldn't find any words to refute. Then he flew into a rage out of humiliation. How dare you, he said coldly. Are you threatening I? Li Yi was a little speechless. Didn't they agree to be reasonable? Who was threatening who now? Qin Yu's neck was only scratched a little and was no longer bleeding. He sneered and said, Oh, you said that I wanted to commit murder first. Who saw it? He turned around and pulled a random youth over, asking, Did you see it? No. The young man kept shaking his head, not daring to look Qin Yu in the eye. Did you see that? Qin Yu loosened his grip and pulled another one over. No. What about you? No. I didn't see it either. Qin Yu pulled a few people in a row, and everyone kept shaking their heads. How could they dare to go against young Duke Qin and the king of Shu? A bright smile appeared on his face, and he said, Look, they all said they didn't see it, but you actually framed me. It seems that I have offended them even more. The few people who were dragged over by him just now couldn't help but step back, causing the people behind them to move back as well. Seeing is believing. Crazy Qin was indeed worthy of his reputation. In front of so many people, he inverted black and white, but no one dared to speak the truth. Naturally, they had to stay as far away from him as possible. Li Yi noticed that there was something wrong with Mississippi Lu's aura, which was extremely abnormal for a martial arts master like her. His eyelids twitched, and he hurriedly grabbed her wrist and said, Don't be impulsive. There are always people here who are not blind. They will give us justice. Justice? You mean justice? Qin Yu couldn't help laughing. There was actually someone talking about justice with him? I saw it. As if to confirm what Li Yi had just said, a voice came from somewhere. It was like a ruthless slap on Qin Yu's face. Qin Yu's laughter became softer and softer. Finally, it stopped and his face became calm. Those who knew him well knew that the smiling young Duke Qin was very scary. After laughing, the calmness of the young Duke Qin could no longer be described with the word, scary. Li Yi looked at Mississippi Lu with a little pride and said, See, I was right, wasn't I? If he hadn't seen Li Xian just now, he might really have rushed out with Mississippi Lu. After all, he had been a county lieutenant for so long, and he was very familiar with the law. No matter how powerful the king of Shu was, he didn't have the power to arrest people at will. Otherwise, it would be overstepping his authority, which was a big taboo. If he said he would assassinate, then he would do it. If he said he would do it, then he would do it. Did he think he was the emperor? Before becoming the crown prince and the emperor, the princes in the capital city had always been treated like pigs. So what if he was the king of Shu? Could he frame people at will? There were countless people in the capital city who were afraid of him, flattered him, and curried favor with him. But these people did not include Li Yi. Even if he became the emperor in the future, at worst, he would not stay in the Jing kingdom anymore. At this time, everyone's attention was no longer on Li Yi. They were all looking for the source of the voice. They wanted to know who on earth was so bold that he didn't even give face to Madman Qin. Soon they found it. There seemed to be a figure standing behind the guards of the king of Shu's mansion, who had surrounded the two people. Because they were standing in the light, it was difficult for them to see clearly in the dark. In addition, with the guards of the king of Shu's mansion blocking them, they could only vaguely see a vague shadow. They didn't know where the person came from and how long he had been standing there. But this was not important. What was important was what he had just done. What are you? The smile on Qin Yu's face disappeared, which meant that he was on the verge of exploding. The guards made way for him. With the help of the light, everyone saw the person, the appearance of those people. Standing in front was a young man. Even though the light wasn't too bright, it could still be seen that he was extremely handsome. Behind him stood several people who seemed to be his bodyguards. When they saw this scene, most people were stunned because they didn't know this young man. From the moment this young man appeared, the King of Shu's face was full of surprise. Cui Qingyu and Chen Lijun, who had been silent all this time, had a trace of doubt on their faces. But soon, they understood and were somewhat surprised.
They thought to themselves, "This is the King of Shu's mansion, why is he here?"
"What are you?" The young man walked out of the darkness and walked to Qin Yu's side.
As if to answer his question, he murmured, No, I'm not Dong."
However, in the next moment, he did something that shocked everyone to their core. When he walked in front of Qin Yu, the young man's face suddenly darkened. He kicked Qin Yu in the stomach and sent him flying.
He said angrily, "I understand you are scolding me."
Bang! The force of this kick was not light. After Qin Yu flew out, he hit the pillar hard. Those who were close to him even saw him spit out a mouthful of blood. The surrounding atmosphere suddenly quieted down. Countless people widened their eyes in shock, and disbelief. The person who flew out just now was young Duke Qin? Did they see it wrong? Someone actually dared to treat him like this. Who was this strange young man? Everyone said that Qin Yu was a madman. This was the real madman. Li Yi was a little envious.
Sometimes violence was the most suitable way to solve problems. The problem was, when could he be like this, no matter who the other party was, whether it was the King of Shu or the young Duke, and fight without saying a word?
"What are you doing?" Only then did the King of Shu recover from the shock. His face suddenly changed, and he said angrily, "Li Xian, are you crazy?" Li Xian patted the hem of his robe, looked up at the King of Shu and said calmly, "Your Highness, he is scolding me." "Scolding me means scolding you and insulting His Majesty. How can your Highness have such a friend?" The King of Shu was stunned, and then he felt very depressed. This was the second time he was speechless by someone. His father and Prince Ning were the legitimate children of the Empress Dowager, and their positions in the royal family were extremely important. Li Xian was the crown prince of Prince Ning and was valued by his father. With his status, Qin Yu should not have scolded him. However, was it reasonable for him to kick Qin Yu away? Chapter 386. There were many people in the King of Shu's mansion tonight. Most of them didn't know the young man who suddenly appeared and kicked Qin Yu away. However, some people finally recognized him after thinking for a moment. Prince Ning was far away in Qing'an Prefecture and rarely appeared in the capital. Naturally, the chances of Crown Prince Li Xian appearing in public were even smaller. However, this didn't mean that he could be insulted by Qin Yu. Not to mention Qin Yu, even Prime Minister Qin wouldn't do this. Because Prince Ning was not an ordinary prince. He was the emperor's younger brother and held great power. Although he was far away in Qing'an Prefecture, no one dared to underestimate him. The emperor attached great importance to him and kept him in the capital to supervise Jiangxi province. The supervisor of Jiangxi province didn't supervise the common people, but the officials, nobles, and even the royal family. This included Prime Minister Qin, the King of Shu, and many people present and their family elders. The supervisor of Jiangxi province had the right to speak directly to the emperor without going through the censorate. This supervisor had only been in the capital for a little more than a month. Normally, he did not show himself, hiding in the crown prince's manor. He never attended banquets, nor did he interact with the nobles in the capital. He only did one thing when no one was prepared. He reported to the emperor that Chen Yu, the governor of the capital, had abused his power for personal gain. Thus, Chen Yu was banished thousands of miles away. Although the Chen family's power in the capital was not shaken, their years of planning were destroyed and they suffered heavy losses. The Chen family's loss was the King of Shu's loss. This was the only thing that people remembered about Crown Prince Li Xian. Now there was a second thing. He violently beat up Qin Yu, the eldest grandson of Prime Minister Qin's family, in the King of Shu's mansion because Qin Yu unknowingly scolded him. Wait a minute. Was that an insult or not? Let's not talk about this for now. After tonight, people had a new understanding of this low-key crown prince. There might be another madman in the capital. A madman crazier than Qin Yu. Madmen weren't scary. What was scary was a madman with a strong background. This crown prince's background was obviously much stronger than Qin Yu's. Ahem, haha. A light cough broke the silence. Qin Yu crawled up from the ground with difficulty, clutching his lower abdomen. Perhaps it was because of the severe pain, but his expression was somewhat hideous. He was smiling.
Although the expression on his face was a little twisted and there was even a trace of blood at the corner of his mouth, everyone could feel that he was smiling.
How could he still laugh at a time like this? What kind of lunatics were these? Very soon, they seemed to have thought of something.
Just now, it seemed that in a situation that was even more severe than the one they were facing now, there was also someone who was smiling, and his smile was much more beautiful than young Duke Qin's.
They looked at Li Xianzi and felt that everyone was acting strangely tonight. Cough, so it's... Your Highness. Qin Yu coughed a few more times and coughed out some blood. His face was full of smiles, but it looked very strange. Li Xian looked very surprised. He walked in front of Qin Yu and said, "So it's young Duke Qin. I was really impolite just now. If I knew the person who scolded me was young Duke Qin, I would have used less strength." Qin Yu bowed slightly and said with a smile, "In that case, I have to thank your Highness." The crowd didn't understand what they were talking about. They really didn't understand these big shots. Obviously, they had been beaten to the point of vomiting blood, but they still had to thank the other side, while the other side accepted it calmly. What was wrong with this world? At this time, the development of the matter had completely exceeded their expectations. It didn't matter whether it was an assassination or a murder. It didn't matter whether Li Xianzi could leave the King of Shu's mansion safely. These things all became secondary because of young Duke Qin's kick. Now, apart from young Duke Qin and Prince Ning's heir Li Xian, the only one who could participate in this matter was King of Shu. In fact, King of Shu was also very troubled. Of course, it was impossible to catch Li Xian. If he detained Li Xian tonight because of this matter, he would become the laughingstock of the whole capital city tomorrow. No matter how much they didn't get along, Qin Yu was an outsider here after all. More importantly, he was in the wrong. But if he ignored it, how could he explain to Qin Yu? The Qin family and he had been in the same boat for a long time. How could he disappoint the Qin family? He knew better than anyone why Li Xian appeared here tonight and why he attacked Qin Yu. It turned out that he had underestimated Li Xianzi. His relationship with Li Xian was far more than ordinary friends. In this way, the reason why Qin Yu refused his invitation just now was probably because of Li Xian. Qin Yu made an unintentional mistake just now. He has received the punishment he deserves. This matter is over. King of Shu said with a sullen face. The county magistrate of Chong and Li Yi brought a female assassin into the king's mansion to assassinate young Duke Qin. He has evil intentions. He will be temporarily detained by the King of Shu's mansion and handed over to the Ministry of Justice tomorrow. If Li Xian hadn't appeared, he might not have made such a fuss. But his appearance made King of Shu make up his mind to directly determine this matter as an assassination. Since Li Xian made him uncomfortable, he naturally wouldn't let him feel comfortable. Li Yi's eyes flickered slightly. It would be strange if a person like King of Shu could become the emperor. He was so narrow-minded. It was him who invited him here. Just now, he said that he would have a bright future if he followed him. Now he turned his back on him. The old emperor must be blind to pass the throne to him. If King of Shu could bear it at this time, he would really be careful. But in order to punish him, King of Shu was so eager, so the danger was naturally much less. Assassinate Qin Yu? Temporarily detain the King of Shu's mansion? A smile appeared on Li Xian's face. He looked at King of Shu and asked, "Your Highness, who gave you this power? His Majesty or yourself?" As soon as Li Xian said this, King of Shu's face immediately changed and became completely gloomy. The hearts of the people around also trembled. His Highness had completely fallen out with King of Shu. Just because of Li Xianzi? Was it worth it? Although King of Shu was a prince, he could do whatever he wanted in his own fief, which was far away from the emperor. But this was the capital city. Strictly speaking, King of Shu, who was already an adult, should have gone back to his fief long ago. In the capital city, although everyone had to salute him and call him Your Highness, in fact, he could only use this title. He had no real power, because he was not the crown prince, let alone the emperor. Of course, because King of Shu had a strong background and was very likely to ascend the throne, no one in the capital city dared to talk to him like this. They could not wait to flatter him. Even if he was fine and overstepped his power, no one would care.
But if this matter was brought to the table, King of Shu would not be in the right even if it was brought to His Majesty. Because the person who said that was Crown Prince Li Xian, the supervisor of Jiangyi province, the supervisor of King of Shu. Moreover, even a blind man could tell what was going on tonight. If the Crown Prince, as the supervisor, intervened, the King of Shu and Little Duke Qin would no longer be in the hands of the King of Shu and Little Duke Qin. The reputation that the King of Shu had accumulated over a long period of time would also be smeared with a big stain. After Crown Prince tore off this fig leaf, King of Shu had been forced into a desperate situation. Chapter 387. Who gave you this authority? Was it His Majesty or yourself? The King of Shu realized sadly that he was speechless at Li Xian's words. His father had never said such a thing. As for himself, of course, he was not qualified to do so. Li Xian's words struck the King of Shu's heart. No matter how the King of Shu answered, he would be in the wrong. Li Xian's words even tore off the King of Shu's mask, making him feel as though he was exposed in front of everyone. He was a prince, yes, but this was the capital. It was precisely because he was a prince, an adult prince, that he could not do as he pleased. It was just that no one had pointed this out. No one was willing to offend him. Everyone he came into contact with was flattering him and bootlicking him. However, no one was willing to offend him, but it did not mean that no one was willing to offend him. The King of Shu's face was indescribably gloomy. He could no longer maintain his deliberate calmness. He and Li Xian did not see eye to eye. This had been a fact since they were young. However, it was the first time they had completely fallen out like this. He chose to completely fall out with her for someone who wasn't that important to him. The King of Shu was angry, surprised, and puzzled. He did not understand. Did Li Xian really not care at all? Did he not care about the fact that he would become the emperor in the future? The King of Shu did not know that if Li Xian knew of his thoughts, he would probably be met with another wave of mockery. He would not care so much. He only knew that when the King of Shu really ascended to the throne, he would no longer have such a chance. The atmosphere in the hall was strange to the point of freezing. Everyone, including Cui Chengyu, Chen Lijun, and even Qin Yu and Madman Qin, were silent. Most people did not even dare to breathe loudly. Now that things had developed to this point, it was no longer something they could intervene in. If your highness has nothing else, we will leave first. The first to break the silence was Li Xian. He first smiled at the King of Shu, then turned his head, put his arm around Li Yi's shoulder, and walked out. The King of Shu did not say a word and Qin Yu was expressionless. The guards of the King of Shu's residence did not stop them and consciously made way for them. How did this happen? Li Xian let go of Li Yi's shoulder and asked in astonishment before they walked out of the King of Shu's mansion. Before Li Yi could answer, he seemed to have thought of something and a look of understanding appeared on his face. He glanced at Mississippi Lu and said, I know, so it's because of that lunatic Qin Yu. But doesn't he always like married women? How could he? Li Yi found it hard to associate this chatterbox beside him with the domineering crown prince just now. He shook his head and asked, Why are you here? I'm here to see if you will stir up any trouble in the King of Shu's residence. Li Xian looked as if he had great foresight and said, If I had come a little later, you wouldn't have killed the King of Shu and Madman Qin, right? I didn't want to kill the King of Shu, Mississippi Lu said lightly. For some reason, Li Xian only felt as if a cold wind was blowing around him. He didn't want to kill the King of Shu. He had to thank Madman Qin because he saved his life. The King of Shu recruited you? Li Xian suddenly asked. Li Yi nodded. You didn't agree? Li Xian asked again. Li Yi glanced at him. Wasn't it obvious? If he had agreed to the King of Shu, what happened just now would not have happened. Li Xian felt inexplicably happy. He had a lot of happy things these 2 days. He asked casually, Why? Don't you know that he is the prince most likely to inherit the throne? Then why did you still fall out with him? Li Yi asked back. Because I don't like him, Li Xian said matter-of-factly. I don't like him either. Why? Because he is ugly. When sitting in the carriage on the way back to the Crown Prince's residence, Li Xian was still thinking about the question just now. The King of Shu is not ugly, he said to himself. Then he nodded and said, Of course, he is far inferior to me. Compared to that guy, he is also a little inferior. A mysterious smile appeared on his face. Then he opened the curtain and said,
Lu Liang, hurry up, what are you waiting for? The guard driving the carriage smiled bitterly. Your Highness, this is already fast enough.
We can reach the Crown Prince's residence in 15 minutes at most. His Highness had been acting strangely these 2 days.
In the past, when he returned to the residence, he would delay as long as he could. Now, he wished he could grow a pair of wings and fly back. The King of Shu's residence was not far from the city gate. When Li Yi arrived, there were many carriages coming in and out. There was a long queue of carriages entering the city. He asked the carriage to stop outside the city. The Crown Prince's residence was in a different direction. After rejecting Li Xian's offer to send them, he naturally had to walk over with Mississippi Lu. He was limping, and the way he walked was a little strange.
He did not feel anything when he was in the King of Shu's residence, but now it had somehow gotten worse.
He thought that he would let Rui massage it when he returned.
It should be fine the next morning, and he would not delay his trip to the palace.
Take it.
Mississippi Lu stopped, turned around, and suddenly threw the sword in her hand to him.
Li Yi caught it and asked, "What is it?"
Mississippi Lu squatted down slightly and said, "Come on up."
"It's okay. I can walk on my own."
Li Yi shook his head and said,
"Dawdle."
She seemed to be a little impatient and walked straight over.
"Don't be so wishy-washy. The city gate is about to close." Li Yi held the sword called Autumn Water in his hand. A faint fragrance lingered in his nose.
He thought to himself that there would be a day when he would be carried by a woman.
Moreover, it was Mississippi Lu. Thinking back to half a year ago, she was still riding on a horse with a proud expression. Now, it was really like a dream. "I'm sorry. I'm sorry." 2 voices rang out at the same time. Mississippi Lu stopped for a moment and then continued to move forward. There was a long silence again, and the atmosphere was a little awkward. "You first. You first." The atmosphere was awkward for a while. "I'm sorry to have made you suffer tonight," Li Yi said apologetically. She was Lu Rui. There was only one Lu Rui in the world, the heroine Lu Rui, who was quick to repay kindness and revenge.
Rui had doted on her since she was a child and refused to let her suffer the slightest grievance.
This was also the main reason why she had such a character. Who was the King of Shu? Who was the young Duke Qin? There should be nothing in the world and no one could make her feel wronged, including himself.
However, it was because of him that she had to be restrained by many things.
"There's nothing to be sorry about. I shouldn't have been so impulsive. After all, this is the capital," Mississippi Lu said after a moment of silence. "You have nothing to be sorry about. Because I was going to do the same. We can't just obediently stretch out our hands when others want to cut off our hands, right? And then, let's kill our way out. They can't stop us. They can't stop me.
What's yours and mine is the same.
What's divine punishment? You've seen it that night in Willow Village. How did you do it? Do you want to learn it?" "Yes. You should have told me earlier. How would I know if you didn't tell me?"
"If you had asked earlier, I would have taught you. There's no need to be polite between us."
"Do you really want to learn it?" Plop. Li Yi got up from the ground. Looking at Lu Rui's back, he limped and chased after her. "Don't go. Don't you want to learn it? How can I teach you if you leave?" The King of Shu's mansion. After what happened just now, the banquet couldn't continue tonight. The King of Shu had completely lost face in front of everyone. His face was extremely gloomy. The rest of the people didn't say a word and didn't even dare to breathe heavily. It was not until now that the King of Shu realized that he hadn't paid enough attention to Li Xianzi from the beginning to the end. Li Xian's falling out with him made him deeply aware of this fact. He just didn't know what kind of position Li Xianzi had in his father's heart. But no matter what, his actions tonight had completely pushed Li Xianzi to the opposite side. Because of this, Qin Yu would definitely hold a grudge against him. The King of Shu hadn't done something like this for a long time. Standing behind him, Chen Li Jun and Cui Qingyu still had shock and astonishment on their faces. For them, this was a trivial matter that Qin Yu could solve alone. Who would have thought that the situation would suddenly take a turn for the worse and even the King of Shu would be involved? The result of this matter was far beyond their expectations. As the supervisor, Crown Prince Li Xian had actually fallen out with the King of Shu in front of so many people. From their point of view, this matter was simply incomprehensible. I'll go back first. Qin Yu's expression was calm. It was hard to tell whether he was happy or angry.
After saying that, he left with his men. This strange silence didn't last long.
Everyone scrambled to take their leave. Naturally, they didn't dare to mention what had just happened. The king of Shu and Qin Yu looked very calm on the surface. But those with discerning eyes knew that after tonight, there would probably be a big storm in the capital city. The focus of the storm was, of course, Li Xianzi, who had just shown his outstanding talent. It was just unknown whether the crown prince could continue to protect him under the wrath of the king of Shu and little Duke Qin. Late at night, the entire capital city was gradually shrouded in darkness and silence. Most of the lights in the imperial city were extinguished. Only rows of patrolling guards with lanterns occasionally passed by.
At this time, in the depths of the palace, there were still lights swaying in a palace, and the sound of pages turning could be heard from time to time.
A ghostly figure suddenly appeared outside the Hall of Diligent Government. Chief Chamberlain Changde glanced at the eunuchs who had begun to doze off outside the hall. He coughed lightly, and the two immediately woke up. Seeing the figure standing in front of them, their faces immediately turned pale. Just as they were about to salute, Changde waved his hand, gently pushed open the hall door, and floated in. Inside the Hall of Diligent Government, Emperor Jing was reviewing memorials at the innermost table. Hearing the sound coming from inside the hall, Emperor Jing looked up and casually asked, "What time is it now?" "Your Majesty, it's just past midnight." "It's so late." Although Emperor Jing said so, he covered his mouth and coughed a few times. Then he continued to review. Changde hesitated for a moment and said, "Your Majesty, it's getting late. Li Xianzi once said that Your Majesty shouldn't be too tired.
For the sake of the world, Your Majesty, please go to bed early. It's been so many years."
1 or 2 more days won't make a difference, Emperor Jing said indifferently. A wry smile appeared on Changde's face. His Majesty had said this for several years, but every time, he just said it casually. Speaking of Li Xianzi.
Emperor Jing put down his pen, rubbed his wrist and said, "Did he attend the banquet invited by the king of Shu tonight?" Changde nodded and said, "About the banquet invited by the king of Shu today, I have something to report to Your Majesty."
"Tell me, what kind of trouble did my county magistrate Li cause?" Jing Emperor smiled, got up and stretched, walked down and said, "Your Majesty is wise." Changde was stunned for a moment, and then said with great admiration.
Emperor Jing waved his hand and said, "What wise?"
"He and Xian are good friends. Li Xian wanted to win him over, but he chose the wrong person. One is arrogant, and the other is stingy. If they didn't cause any trouble, I would be surprised." Hearing this, Changde smiled and stopped thinking about it.
He told Emperor Jing everything that happened in the mansion of the king of Shu tonight.
If the king of Shu or Li Yi were present, they would probably be shocked by Changde's words. This was because his description of tonight's events was extremely detailed.
It was as though he was personally present at the scene.
Even the details that Li Yi and the king of Shu did not notice were not left out by him.
Xian was there.
Emperor Jing habitually touched the short beard on his chin and asked, "Did Li Xianzi do anything before Xian went to the mansion of the king of Shu?" Changde shook his head and said, "According to the spy, Li Xianzi should be afraid of the Qin family and the king of Shu, so he didn't do anything special tonight. Qin Yu wanted to cut off Li Xianzi's hand, but Li Xianzi didn't do anything. But the second Miss Lu almost cut Qin Yu with a sword. When the king of Shu wanted to arrest them, Li Xianzi happened to arrive." "Afraid of the Qin family and the king of Shu?" Emperor Jing shook his head and said, "I'm afraid that only those who died in the Willow Leaf village know that the Qin family and the king of Shu are not enough to make him afraid.
He didn't do anything, but he was waiting for me to do something."
Changde's face showed a trace of doubt.
Although he had been with His Majesty for decades, he still couldn't guess some of the emperor's thoughts.
"Forget it. He is so generous to me, so I can't be stingy to him. It's good to let him make a mess in this lifeless capital city." Emperor Jing stood in front of the palace door with his hands clasped behind his back. Looking at the stars in the sky, he showed a smile that even Changde couldn't understand. Chapter 388. With such a son, why should the Qin family worry about not perishing? Emperor Jing did not continue to read the memorials. After writing a few edicts, he went to the empress' bedroom to rest.
Chongda stood at the door of the Hall of Diligent Government, playing with a token in his hand. Thinking of the contents of the edicts, a rare sneer appeared on his old face. The great victory in the battle with the Qi kingdom and the capture of the city was a great achievement that the former emperor and even Emperor Taizu had not completed. Now, the emperor's prestige among the officials had reached its peak. Recently, the various edicts issued, and the voices of opposition in the court had almost disappeared. Make a fuss. It's a pool of stagnant water, but there are many undercurrents. However, it's good to make a fuss. After a moment, he put away the wooden token in his hand and murmured. His figure quickly disappeared into the dark palace. When he woke up, Li Yi could hardly feel the pain in his ankle. He also had a stream of zhenqi that second granduncle had poured into his body. Although it was almost useless against masters, his body was indeed much better than before. Besides the zhenqi massage from Rui, it was also related to his gradually improving self-healing ability that he could jump up and down so quickly. As usual, he had to go to the palace to teach. Now that the time of the prince and princess's mathematics class was arranged by him, he naturally did not need to get up so early. When he went out, Rui helped him tidy up his collar and warned him, "My husband, you have to be careful these 2 days. Don't walk or run. Although you didn't hurt your muscles or bones, you still need 2 days to recover." While no one was paying attention, Li Yi secretly kissed her on the cheek and said, "I know." Rui was thin-skinned and blushed, but she did not avoid it. Behind Li Yi, the little servant girl made an "ah" sound. She was about to come in, but she covered her face and ran out. Mississippi Lu was already waiting for him in the carriage outside. When Li Yi walked out and was about to get on the carriage, several figures came from not far away. Seeing the people walking over, Li Yi's expression froze for a moment, then a hint of joy appeared on his face as he said, "Why are you here?" Lu Yichang, who was dressed in a yamen uniform, was also pleasantly surprised. He walked over and said somewhat bewilderedly, "Sir, it's really you. When did you come to the capital?" Li Yi looked at him and asked with a smile. When he was in Qing and Fu, it was because of Lu Yi that he could be at ease as a lazy county magistrate. This guy was born to be a bailiff. Even Li Yi had no choice but to accept his abilities. "Just arrived 2 days ago." Lu Yi smiled and said, "Sir Lu has been transferred to Jingdo and has brought me with him. I originally wanted to pay a visit to you, but I didn't expect to see you so soon." County Magistrate Lu has been transferred to the capital. Li Yi was a bit surprised to hear this. Although Qing and Fu was also an important town in the Jing kingdom, it was still inferior to Jingdo. Under normal circumstances, being transferred from Qing and Fu to the center of power in the Jing kingdom was a promotion. Even County Magistrate Lu would be transferred to Jingdo one day? This time, without waiting for Lu Yichang to reply, a middle-aged man dressed in a scarlet official's uniform came forward and said with a smile, "Greetings, County Magistrate Li." He didn't introduce his official position because it wasn't the first time the two had met. When Li Yi went to deal with the matter of the crazy monk, he saw him at the yamen. At that time, this person stood beside the magistrate and seemed to be a county magistrate. "What business does County Magistrate's son have here?" Li Yi looked at him and asked. The middle-aged man laughed and said, "Marquis Qin's Fu sent someone to the yamen this morning to report that young Duke Qin was injured by an assassin yesterday. I was ordered to come here to investigate." County Magistrate Chen had a smile on his face, but he was secretly bitter in his heart. It wasn't good to let him, a county magistrate, deal with the matter of Prime Minister Qin's Fu and Viscount's Fu. No matter which side he offended, it wouldn't be good. However, it was very clear that offending County Magistrate Li was much wiser than offending Prime Minister Qin. Li Yi thought that crazy Qin moved fast. An official came early in the morning. He wasn't even willing to wait for half a day. The king of Shu didn't have the power to detain people, but the yamen of Jingdo had the power. Moreover, this county magistrate's attitude was very good and friendly. He looked like he was doing things according to the law, but he still maintained etiquette. People who could get to this position were indeed not ordinary people. Hearing this, Mississippi Lu jumped down from the carriage and stood beside Li Yi. Lu Yichang opened his mouth but didn't know what to say. This was his first time handling a case, but he didn't expect to find County Magistrate Li, Lord Li. There was no doubt that without Lord Li, there would be no Lu Yichang today. However, today it was the county magistrate who was in charge, so he couldn't get a word in.
At this time, he was in a bit of a dilemma. County Magistrate's son smiled and said, "County Magistrate Li and the girl only need to go to the county government with me. The right and wrong will be decided by themselves. I will also act according to the law. I hope County Magistrate Li won't be embarrassed." County Magistrate's son's duty was to take them back. As for what would happen later, it was County Magistrate Lu's headache. The people of Marquis Qin's Fu were waiting in the county government. This first case was probably enough to make County Magistrate Lu, who suddenly appeared out of nowhere, suffer a lot. Li Yi smiled and said, "Sorry, I have to go to the palace now. I'm afraid I can't go back with County Magistrate Sunday. You go back first. After I come out of the palace, I will go directly to the county government." There was a prime minister in Qin's mansion. If he went to the county government, they could do whatever they wanted. He was not so stupid. What's more, the thing he was waiting for hadn't come yet. Although he didn't know whether it would come or not, he had different preparations. But he didn't prepare to go to the county government with County Magistrate Sunday. County Magistrate's son was in a bit of a dilemma because he didn't know why County Magistrate Li went to the palace. However, he couldn't afford to delay anything in the palace. But if he didn't take the girl back, how could he explain to the people of Qin's mansion? County Magistrate Li this. When County Magistrate's son was hesitating, a sound of hooves came from the front, which interrupted the struggle in his mind. A gorgeous carriage stopped in front of the Viscount's mansion, and there were several people riding on horses in front. The leader was an old man with wrinkles all over his face. Several people behind him were also wearing brocade robes. They looked middle-aged with fair faces and no beard. County Magistrate's son could tell at a glance that they should be the servants of the palace. Li Yi also saw it. He saw what he was waiting for, or rather, the person. The leading old man got off the horse and walked to Li Yi. He said expressionlessly, "According to His Majesty's order, I'm here to take County Magistrate Li to the palace." County Magistrate's son's eyelids twitched. According to His Majesty's order? His Majesty sent a servant to take him to the palace. It seemed that today's matter was destined to not go smoothly. The man was an old acquaintance. Li Yi walked over and looked at Chong Da. He said, "Supervisor Chong, why does His Majesty want to see me?" County Magistrate's son's eyelids twitched again. "Why does His Majesty want to see you? Is this something you should ask?" He began to be confused about County Magistrate Li's position in His Majesty's heart. He couldn't offend Qin's mansion, but could he offend His Majesty? Chong Da still said expressionlessly, "You'll know when you get there." After that, he took out a plate from his pocket and threw it to Li Yi. He said, "Put this away and get in the carriage." Looking at the plate in his hand, Li Yi asked in confusion, "What's this?" There were many rules and plates in the capital. Viscounts had plates that represented their identities. Entering the palace had plates that allowed people to enter the palace. Everything had to be done with plates. It seemed that it was very popular to give plates to the emperor and monks. The problem was that he didn't know what these plates were for. Although Li Yi didn't know the plate in his hand, it didn't mean that County Magistrate's son didn't know it. In fact, even if the County Magistrate didn't know it, it was impossible for him not to know it. Seeing this plate, he felt his legs go weak and cold sweat appeared on his forehead. Was Qin's mansion crazy? How could they send him to arrest County Magistrate Li? With this plate, except for His Majesty, who had the power to arrest him? This was the plate of the Secret Intelligence Office. The Secret Intelligence Office was a special department directly under His Majesty, and only answered to His Majesty. It had always been them who arrested people. How could others arrest them? It was fine if they were targeted by the censors. At most they would argue with them. But if they were targeted by the Secret Intelligence Office, they would have no way out. Thinking of these things, County Magistrate's son felt his legs go even weaker. It took him a lot of effort to steady himself. He had already cursed the steward of Qin's mansion in his heart. Chong Da said lightly, "This is the plate of the Secret Intelligence Office. From today on, you only need to listen to His Majesty's orders. Apart from that, you don't need to care about anything else." Hearing this, Li Yi's eyes lit up. He suddenly felt that the simple and unadorned plate in his hand had become dazzling. Only need to listen to the old emperor's orders. Didn't that mean that with this plate, he could do whatever he wanted in the capital? Good stuff, good stuff. Seeing that Li Yi was still standing there, Changde urged, "Let's go." Li Yi nodded. Just as he was about to get into the more luxurious carriage, he suddenly seemed to remember something. He turned back, looked at County Magistrate's son and asked, "County Magistrate's son, what did you want to say just now?" "I wanted to say." County Magistrate's son's forehead was already covered with a thin layer of sweat, but he didn't even dare to wipe it. With a straight face he said, "I wanted to say that the monks that County Magistrate Li asked us to track last time have been found. They are all monks from the Qi Kingdom. Although they have already escaped the capital, the Ministry of Justice has already issued an arrest warrant. County Magistrate Li, please rest assured. As soon as there is news of them, I will immediately send someone to inform you." "Then I'll have to trouble you, County Magistrate Sunday." Li Yi gave him a meaningful smile and got into the carriage from the palace with Mississippi Lu. Seeing the carriage go far away and the eunuchs on horseback also disappear before his eyes, County Magistrate's son let out a long sigh of relief. His heart finally relaxed. "Go back," he said angrily. "Damn steward of Qin's mansion. Why didn't he tell me that County Magistrate Li was from the intelligence office? Didn't he send me to die?" A bailiff asked in confusion, "Your Excellency, aren't we here to catch the assassins?" "Where are the assassins?" County Magistrate's son was angry when he didn't say it. He immediately turned around and gave the bailiff a hard kick on his butt. "Catch the assassins? Catch your mother." The bailiff didn't dare to dodge. He said pitifully, "Your Excellency, my mother passed away 2 years ago. How dare you talk back?" Seeing this scene, a smile appeared on Lu Yi's face. No matter where he was, the county magistrate was still the former county magistrate. The carriage stopped in front of the palace gate. Li Yi turned to Mississippi Lu and said, "I don't know when I can come out. Go take a walk on the street and wait for me here in 4 hours." Changde reminded him, "The token that His Majesty gave you to enter the palace allows you to bring 2 people with you." Li Yi was stunned. He looked at the old eunuch and said, "Why didn't you say so earlier?" He looked back at Mississippi Lu and said, "Then let's go to the palace together. I can show you what the palace looks like." Changde said expressionlessly, "She can only accompany you in. She can't wander around, and you can't either. You talk too much." Li Yi thought to himself, "This old eunuch doesn't usually talk so much. Why didn't he stop talking today?" Mississippi Lu still carried her sword with her, but even the general had to take off his armor when entering the palace. She could only leave her sword at the palace gate. Before Li Yi went to Bowen Hall, he had to see the old emperor first. Changde led the way while he and Mississippi Lu walked behind. Speaking of which, half of the experts in the world are in the palace. In the palace, any old eunuch you meet could be a peerless expert. Don't run around later, Li Yi reminded Mississippi Lu. This time, Rui didn't refute Li Yi. She had never been to the palace before and never thought that she would have the chance to come here. She looked at the palace walls on both sides and the palace in the distance with interest. For example, Steward Chong. Although he doesn't know the Sunflower Manual, he's definitely very good at martial arts. It's just that he's a little old. If he's willing, you can find him later to exchange a few moves. But remember to go easy on him. After all, the old man's body is weak. Li Yi knew that Mississippi Lu was a battle maniac, but in reality, it was rare to find someone who was on par with her. He was too weak, and Rui was too strong. Neither of them were suitable opponents. There must be a lot of experts in the palace. It should be enough for her to have a few good fights. No. Mississippi Lu didn't even look at the old man and said straightforwardly, "Why?" Li Yi was a little confused. He had seen Changde's skills. He should be quite good. Could it be that Mississippi Lu didn't want to bully the old man? "I can't beat him." Mississippi Lu's answer was also very straightforward. This time, Li Yi was really surprised to be able to make the proud Mississippi Lu admit that she was inferior to him. This old eunuch seemed to be much stronger than he had imagined. He looked up at Changde. No wonder he was the steward of the inner attendants. He was always by the old emperor's side. The old man was still as strong as before. "My body is weak?" Hearing Li Yi's words, the old man who was walking in front curled his lips. In his opinion, Li Yi's martial arts were not worth mentioning at all. On the other hand, The little girl beside him was really talented. At such a young age, she had already reached such a high realm. He had seen too many talented people in his life, but only Her Royal Highness could be mentioned in the same breath as her. In Li Yi's opinion, Mississippi Lu was already an expert of experts that he would never be able to surpass in his lifetime. He didn't expect this old eunuch to be even more powerful. It seemed that since ancient times, the saying that experts came out of the palace was not wrong at all. The fire of gossip began to burn in his heart. Just as he was about to ask Steward Chong if he knew the sunflower manual, he suddenly felt something and looked up at a palace in front of him.
At a glance, he saw that there were dozens of figures slowly walking out of the palace that was more than twice the size of the palaces around it.
Chapter 389. Court is about to end. Let's go this way. The old eunuch Chongda glanced at the crowd in front of him. After crossing a stone bridge, he bypassed them and chose another path on the left. He entered the palace just in time to end court. Were the people walking toward him the civil and military officials of the Jing kingdom? Walking out of the palace door, the crowd was bustling. Li Yi glanced around and did not see anyone familiar. The one walking in the front is Prime Minister Qin. Chongda did not turn around but suddenly said lightly. Li Yi was not unfamiliar with the words, Prime Minister Qin. Hearing this, he turned around and saw an old man walking in the front. Because of the distance, he could not see his face clearly. Even though they had not met, Li Yi did not have a good impression of this Prime Minister Qin. Not to mention how good he was in politics, he had taught Qin Yu, such a grandson. How good could he be? After passing through a palace wall, he could no longer see the scene of the officials leaving court. Li Yi also put this matter to the back of his mind. Mississippi Lu was waiting in Bowen Hall while Chongda took him to see Emperor Jing. At this time, the officials who had not yet walked out of the palace door were gathered in twos and threes, discussing something in low voices. Is His Majesty finally dissatisfied with Prime Minister Qin? The Minister of State Affairs has not heard anything. It was His Majesty who personally issued the edict. It seems that His Majesty deliberately bypassed Prime Minister Qin. Recently, His Majesty's thoughts are becoming more and more difficult to guess. The appointment of the heir has been delayed again and again. Now he wants to weaken the Qin family. Could it be that the King of Shu is not a prince that His Majesty likes? His Majesty still wants to. Be careful with your words. When the topic of conversation turned to certain matters, the crowd realized that this was not something they could discuss in private. They hurriedly stopped talking and looked around. Seeing that no one was paying attention, they quickened their steps and walked out of the palace. The edicts that His Majesty had just issued in court had become the only thing on their minds. For no reason, an important figure of the Qin family in the Hall of Governmental Affairs had been moved out of the center of power. Although his rank did not change, the meaning he represented was different. How could an empty position compare to a renunciate of the Hall of Governmental Affairs, who could directly participate in political affairs? But this was not all. Several of Prime Minister Qin's students in the capital, who had a close relationship with the Qin family, were also affected to varying degrees. What should have been a bright and boundless future suddenly became uncertain. In addition, there were also some large and small transfers. Without exception, they were all related to the officials of Prime Minister Qin's faction. When these matters were put together, the meaning behind it was very thought-provoking. Was His Majesty finally going to make a move against the group of civil officials led by Prime Minister Qin? For many years, many of His Majesty's decrees had been strongly opposed by these conservative factions. For the stability of the court, His Majesty would often choose to give in. Could it be that this time, His Majesty wanted to take advantage of the peak of the court's prestige to settle old scores with them? Most of the people in the imperial court could not participate in these matters, and they did not dare to continue guessing. It was better to let Prime Minister Qin and the others have a headache. As for whether the King of Shu could become the crown prince, although this matter was closely related to them, at least for now, at least it was not very important. The ancestral rules could not be violated. Even if His Majesty did not think highly of the King of Shu, two of the Empress's sons died prematurely in her early years. It was not until Princess Yongla was born that the imperial physician in the palace concluded that the Empress would never be able to conceive another child in this lifetime. Therefore, it was justifiable for the prince born by concubine Cui to become the crown prince. Moreover, countless officials in the imperial court, including Prime Minister Qin, supported the king of Shu's ascension to the throne.
Under the circumstances of righteousness, even His Majesty could not violate the ancestral rules and the wishes of so many officials at the same time. Without any preparation, such a big shock suddenly occurred in the imperial court. Compared to this, other matters were naturally not so important. For example, yesterday, they learned from the juniors and their families that the king of Shu's invitation last night ended in discord. The crown prince of Ning, Li Xian, and the king of Shu had a falling out. The little duke of Prime Minister Qin's family seemed to have encountered an assassin. These were all jokes between the juniors. No one would connect these two matters. His Majesty's small purge of Prime Minister Qin's family did not affect them. At the moment, the most important matter was another matter. The envoy of the Qi kingdom had arrived in the capital. He requested to see His Majesty twice in a row, but was rejected by His Majesty. The envoy of the Qi kingdom was waiting at the office of the Herald of Honor. His Majesty was preparing to hold another banquet in the palace to celebrate General Su Dingyuan's victorious return. All the civil and military officials in the imperial court, and all the nobles in the capital had to attend. This was like stabbing another knife in the chest of the envoy of the Qi kingdom. Without a doubt, the envoy was sent immediately after the war ended. It must be to discuss the matter of the two cities that had been captured. Judging from His Majesty's intention, it should be to give them the cold shoulder first. This was the first time in many years that he could hold his head up high like this. How could he not send a congratulatory gift? General Su Dingyuan would return to the capital today. The day of the celebration was chosen to be tonight. All the officials hurried home to have a good rest in preparation for tonight's grand event. Li Yi did not know that the old emperor was going to treat everyone to dinner tonight. He secretly rejoiced in his heart. Fortunately, he was careful this morning and did not eat too much for breakfast. Otherwise, he might eat too much later. It was still the same garden and the same pavilion as last time. Even the dishes on the stone table had not changed much. The dignified emperor of a country now looked like an ordinary middle-aged man. He sat opposite Li Yi and ate a bowl of porridge and a few side dishes with relish. "I heard from Xiaofan that you are teaching her how to cook?" Jing Di asked casually, just like an ordinary person chatting with his neighbor. Li Yi had gradually adapted to the old emperor's face. It was normal for an important person to have some eccentricities. Perhaps this emperor had the hobby of disguising himself as a commoner after leaving court. "Princess Xiaofan wants to personally cook for your Majesty and her ladyship. At such a young age, she is filial. This official also admires her." Li Yi did not stand on ceremony and said as he ate. Jing Di nodded. When he thought of Princess Xiaofan, a smile appeared on his face. All the princes and princesses were respectful to him. Only Xiaofan was different. She could let him experience the true feeling of being a father. This was something he could not experience from his other children. He put down the bowl and let Changde pour another bowl of porridge. He said, "I heard from Emingzu that you are treating Yongning's illness. How confident are you?" Jing Di looked at Li Yi and a glimmer of hope flashed in his eyes. Although the imperial doctors in the palace and countless folk doctors were helpless against Yongning's illness, Li Yi was different. If there was someone in this world who could give him a glimmer of hope for Yongning's illness, this person would only be Li Yi. Speaking of this, Li Yi's face became slightly solemn. He said, "To be honest, there is not much hope. I can only try my best." Jing Di's expression froze for a moment. Then he sighed and said, "That child has suffered a lot since she was young. Although I am the emperor of a country, I can do nothing about her illness. I know that you are a truly capable person. I hope that in my lifetime, I can see her like a normal person." Li Yi did not speak. Although this was also what he wanted, he was really not confident about it. He could only plan slowly. He did not know if he would see her again on the stone steps next to the Bowen Hall. "I know what you did in the Cold Mountain Temple. Master Tan Yin also praised you very much. Very good. The territory of the Jing Kingdom is not a place for the monks of the Qi Kingdom to show off." Jing Di quickly changed the topic. Li Yi began to be distracted from that moment. When he passed by the Bowen Hall, he did not seem to see her. The imperial palace was not a fun place. Lu Rui stood outside a palace and watched Li Yi teach a group of princesses and princes. She was even more uninterested in it. She looked at the slowly moving clouds in the distant sky with boredom.
There was a slight sound of footsteps coming from the left corridor.
She turned around and looked at the young woman who was walking towards her.
Both of them were stunned. Li Yi walked out of the Bowen Hall and looked at the stone steps around him. There was a trace of disappointment on his face.
Compared to him, a group of princesses and princes rushed out of the hall like a swarm of bees.
Everyone had an excited smile on their faces, especially Prince Jean. His round body wished he could do a few somersaults on the ground. How could they not be happy? This was their last arithmetic class in the near future. For a long time to come, they would not see the teacher who would put their names on the palace wall. What else could make them happier than this? As for the homework he left for them, let them read and study arithmetic by themselves? What a joke! If they could understand those heavenly books by themselves, why would they need the teacher? In short, for a period of time, they would not have to face those strange symbols. It would be best if they would not see him again. Li Yi stood outside the hall for a while. He was slightly disappointed that he did not see the person he wanted to see. But other than that, he felt that something was missing. After a while, he realized that Mississippi Lu was also missing. The palace was not the Willow Leaf Village, nor was it the Viscount's mansion. It would be a big deal if he just barged in. Mississippi Lu was obviously not the kind of person who would surrender to the palace guards. If they fought, there would be big trouble.
Fortunately, as soon as this thought appeared in Li Yi's mind, he saw her and Emingzu walking towards him from another direction.
You are very good. Mississippi Lu tilted her head and looked at Emingzu. She said very seriously. You too. Emingzu adjusted her cuffs and said with a smile. Li Yi looked at the two of them suspiciously. When did they hook up? Could it be that they did it when he was teaching? But when they were in Qing and Prefecture, Her Royal Highness often came to visit them. At that time they never talked. Where did you go just now? Li Yi looked at Mississippi Lu and asked in confusion. Mississippi Lu glanced at him and obviously did not want to talk. At this time, Emingzu had already let go of a prince who rushed out of the hall excitedly. She looked at Li Yi and asked in confusion. Li Han said that they don't need to attend mathematics class anymore. You let them learn mathematics by themselves? Li Yi nodded. He looked at the little fatty Prince Jean, who was so excited that he wanted to fly to the sky. The corner of his mouth curled up. Did he really think that he could completely let go of himself without going to class? When he came back next time, the little fatty would understand what was called naivety. Why? How can they learn mathematics by themselves? Emingzu looked surprised. Even she had a hard time learning that kind of thing, let alone these children? In her opinion, this was simply an impossible task. Teacher's role is only to inspire and guide them. He can teach them very little. Mathematics is like the starry sky at night, vast and endless. In the end, they still have to explore and discover it by themselves. Li Yi looked at Her Royal Highness and explained, although these princes and princesses are young, they will grow up eventually. I am cultivating their ability to learn independently, and also to solve problems by themselves. I can't let teachers solve all the problems. Moreover, I have already written the textbooks for them.
With their current foundation, it is not a problem for them to understand what is written in them.
Actually, you are too lazy to teach them, right? Emingzu looked at him and asked. For this matter, he actually found such a dignified excuse. If she did not know him very well, she would think that what he said was very reasonable.
No, although she knew that this was just an excuse, she could not deny that at this moment, she really felt that what he said was reasonable.
Being tactful and reserved was a fine tradition of the Wuxia nation. When speaking, people would often beat around the bush before expressing their meaning. Even the Lu family's second young mistress, who had always been aloof from worldly affairs, was no exception. For example, he owed Mississippi Lu 100 taels of silver. Although she would be very serious about anything that involved money, at least Mississippi Lu would not point it out directly.
For example, she would say that she wanted to buy a bolt of cloth and that it was exactly 100 taels of silver. For another example, she would ask him with great concern for the 100 taels of silver she borrowed from him last time. Was the 100 taels of silver she borrowed from him last time? Also, she would tactfully ask Li Yi if the cloud floating in the sky looked like the 100 taels of silver she borrowed from him last time. Obviously, Her Royal Highness did not know how to be tactful like Mississippi Lu. Therefore, the atmosphere began to become awkward. Did father agree? She looked at Li Yi and asked.
Of course. Li Yi replied without hesitation. Just a moment ago, he had reached an agreement on this matter with the old emperor. What a joke. He was able to fool an eminent monk like Master Tan Yin and the monks of the Qi Kingdom. It had always been the monks who fooled others. Would the old emperor be more difficult to deal with than them? Since father had already agreed, Emingzu naturally had nothing to say.
She shook her head helplessly and said, I don't know if father has told you that the palace ban will be lifted tonight.
There will be a banquet at Yonghe Palace for the officials. At the same time, it will be held to welcome General Su. As the county magistrate, you will also have to attend. Really? Li Yi looked surprised. No one had told him about what Emingzu said just now. Chapter 390.
If Li Yi's memory served him right, it had only been a few days since the old emperor held a banquet for the officials in the palace. The banquet for civil and military officials was naturally of a high standard. The king of Shu, who was petty and narrow-minded, could not be compared with it. No matter how rich the national treasury was, it would not be so wasteful. Even if it was to slap the faces of the ambassadors of the Qi Kingdom and stab them in the chest, couldn't it be done in a simpler and more violent way?
For example, throw a few heavenly punishment at the place where they lived? The cost of such a banquet was much lower than that of a banquet. It was totally worth considering.
Can I not go?
Li Yi looked at Emingzu and asked. He had caused a lot of trouble when he attended the banquet of the king of Shu yesterday.
If he messed up the banquet of the old emperor, he would have nowhere to run in the heavily guarded palace. Of course you can, but you have to tell my father yourself.
Emingzu glanced at him and said.
Li Yi thought to himself that it was better to forget it.
As the saying went, being in the king's company was like being with a tiger. Although this tiger was quite docile when he saw it, who knew when it would show its fangs? A tiger was a tiger after all. It was okay to look at it through the fence in the zoo. Only a fool would jump into the tiger mountain to look at it twice a day. Anyway, the main purpose of this visit had been achieved. It was time to discuss with Rui about going on a honeymoon.
As for what would happen in the capital, whether the king of Shu would become the crown prince or not, and what conditions the ambassadors of the Qi Kingdom would put forward, who cared?
What? An invitation from the empress. Li Yi looked at the invitation in Rui's hand and was a little surprised. The old emperor was holding a party in Yonghe Palace and the officials were invited. The empress was also holding a banquet in Phoenix Cry Hall.
Of course, the guests were all the ladies of the capital and the wives of the officials.
Normally, a county magistrate's wife was not qualified to attend, but Rui was also invited. At this time, she was holding the invitation and asking for Li Yi's opinion. Since it's the empress invitation, I'd better go. Li Yi thought it would be good for Rui to visit the palace. After all, there were not many opportunities like this. Moreover, this was the first time the empress had invited him. As the tigress with the highest status in the Jing kingdom, it would not be good to reject her. Li Yi didn't care about the banquet.
He put it aside for the time being and whispered to Rui, "How's the preparation for that matter?"
Rui was startled, then realized what he was talking about. She said in a low voice, "We are leaving, but we don't tell Rui and Xiaofan. This is not good. We're only going out for a while. It's not like we're not coming back." Li Yi shook his head. Which husband and wife would bring along their sister-in-law on their honeymoon? It was even more inappropriate to bring Xiaofan but not her, so he decided not to bring any of them and sneaked off at night.
When they found out, the two of them were already holding hands and standing at the bow of the ship watching the sunrise.
Then okay. Rui lowered her head and whispered. She never had any different opinions about Li Yi's suggestions. Even if she did, in the end, she would still be persuaded by him. When Xiaofan walked into Li Yi's room with a pile of washed clothes in her arms, she looked suspiciously at the son-in-law and the young lady in the yard. A trace of vigilance appeared on her little face. These days, the young lady and son-in-law were very strange. Something that she didn't know was going to happen. She felt that she also needed to talk to the second young lady. The son-in-law and the young lady were now sleeping in the same room. In the whole family, only the second young lady was her strongest ally. After the hundreds of officials left the court and returned home, the news that General Su had returned to the capital and that His Majesty was going to hold a banquet tonight quickly spread throughout the capital. Everyone knew that the envoy of the Qi Kingdom had arrived in the capital for several days, but His Majesty had not yet summoned him.
Now that His Majesty was holding such a grand celebration banquet for General Su, there was no doubt that it was to embarrass the envoy of the Qi kingdom. After all, the entire Jing kingdom, whether it was the monarch or the ministers, had accumulated too much resentment over the years. The officials or dignitaries who were not of high rank but were lucky enough to be invited were naturally happy. They could boast about being able to attend the banquet tonight. Those who were not invited sighed in their hearts. It was such a pity that they could not witness such a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity with their own eyes. However, some people were happy while others were sad. Some people's minds were not on the banquet. Since last night, the servants of the King of Shu's mansion had been trembling with fear and trepidation in everything they did. They were even walking at a slower pace. Just this morning, His Highness had broken several teacups. When a servant was cleaning up the broken pieces, he accidentally made a little too much noise and was scolded by His Highness. He was so frightened that he even knocked his head on the ground. They were just servants of the king's mansion. They knew nothing except that several officials had come to the mansion to look for His Highness this morning. After they left, His Highness's mood became even worse. They just thought to themselves that they had to be more careful in their work and must not anger His Highness again. Compared with the King of Shu's mansion, the atmosphere in the Qin's mansion was not much better. After leaving the court, many officials did not even return to their own homes. About an hour after Prime Minister Qin returned to the mansion, they secretly changed into plain clothes and paid a visit. However, these people, including Prime Minister Qin's students, were all stopped outside by the gatekeeper. The reason was that Prime Minister Qin was not feeling well and they could talk about anything in a few days. Everyone returned in disappointment. Those in the Qin's mansion who knew the inside story were also worried. Father, what does His Majesty mean? Why was eldest brother suddenly transferred from the secretariat? There are several other edicts. They are simply aimed at father and the Qin family. Those officials are waiting outside. Father, do you want to meet them? Everyone came forward to ask. The old man sitting on the chair frowned and said, "There is no need to talk about this. How can we talk about His Majesty's thoughts? I am loyal to His Majesty and the Jing kingdom. The sun, the moon, and the heaven and earth can prove it. Things are not what you think." Prime Minister Qin took a sip of tea. After he calmed down, he frowned slightly again. His Majesty's action this morning was beyond his expectation. Although it was a spring breeze and rain, there was a thunder hidden in the dark. He did not think that he had done anything wrong to His Majesty. Everything he did was for the sake of the Jing kingdom and the people. Why did His Majesty do this? Was it because of the King of Shu? No matter from which point of view, the King of Shu was the only candidate to inherit the throne. Even His Majesty could not change this. Otherwise, there would be great turmoil in the court. He believed that His Majesty himself did not want to see such a scene. He looked up and saw a person in the hall with a white cloth wrapped around his neck. He frowned again and looked at the young man and asked, "What's going on?" "It's a small matter." Qin Yu twitched the corner of his mouth and said indifferently, "These days, you'd better be more stable. Don't go to the King of Shu so often." Although he was extremely disappointed with this grandson, he was the only direct descendant after all. So, Prime Minister Qin could not help but exhort him. Qin Yu did not answer. The expression on his face did not change at all. It was unknown whether he had heard it or not. Prime Minister Qin looked a little thoughtful and said, "His Majesty is holding a banquet in the palace tonight. You and I will go together." Tonight's banquet was not limited to the officials. For people like them, it was normal to bring a member of the younger generation to show his face in front of everyone.
Chapter 391. Tonight, the Imperial Palace was very lively. For the first time, the ban was lifted, which meant that the banquet could go on very, very late. Yonghe Palace and Fengming Hall were actually two adjacent palaces, but they were separated from each other, so the situation on the other side could not be seen. Li Yi and Rui were led by two eunuchs from the palace gate. They had never seen the Imperial Palace so lively. From time to time, eunuchs would lead men and women to pass by, and the number of patrolling guards in the Imperial Palace was much higher than usual. The Imperial Palace was different from other places, where one could bring a large number of maids and guards, especially on a special occasion like tonight. Therefore, only Li Yi and Rui entered the Imperial Palace, while Mississippi Liu and Xiaofan stayed at home. The two did not know any other nobles, so it was actually a little awkward on such an occasion.
This was also one of the reasons why Li Yi was unwilling to attend other people's banquets, even if it was the old emperor's invitation.
That place is the food bureau, which is responsible for the meals in the imperial palace. Almost all the dishes that can't be bought outside can be found there. Li Yi introduced casually to Rui.
The food bureau was very busy that night, and one could see servants coming in and out at every moment.
It was not easy to complete hundreds of banquets.
From the food bureau to Yonghe Palace, there was almost a road formed by the servants of the imperial palace.
At the end of the road, when the two were about to enter Yonghe Palace and Fengming Hall respectively, Li Yi suddenly felt something.
He raised his head and saw a pair of eyes looking at him from not far away.
What a coincidence, Li Xianzi.
I didn't expect that we would meet again so soon.
Qin Yu slowly walked over with a smile on his face. Several young men followed behind him. When they saw Li Yi, their expressions changed slightly. What happened in the King of Shu's mansion last night was still fresh in their minds. Young Duke Qin was killed by Li Xianzi. They did not expect that they would meet again after only one day. It was really a case of enemies meeting each other. Looking at Qin Yu's happy face, as if he could not suppress the joy of meeting an old friend, Li Yi began to admire him a little.
A madman was indeed a madman.
If it was a normal person, even if they didn't fight on the spot, they wouldn't have such a completely opposite attitude. Li Yi also had a smile on his face and said, "Yes, I didn't expect that I would have such a deep fate with young Duke Qin." Let alone Qin Yu, even the young men behind him couldn't help but be startled when they heard this. Young Duke Qin had almost chopped off his hand, and he had also made young Duke Qin suffer a lot. When the two of them met, shouldn't it be tit for tat? Shouldn't one of them die? How could it be related to fate? Madman Qin was Madman Qin. It was normal for him to do things that were beyond common sense. But what about Li Xianzi? Could it be that he was admitting defeat? If he really wanted to give in, then he was gravely mistaken. When had those who had offended young Duke Qin ever had a good ending? How could the enmity be resolved just by admitting defeat? Yes, fate is really deep. Qin Yu murmured. When he saw the woman standing beside Li Yi, a trace of amazement flashed through his eyes.
After a moment of daze, the smile on his face became even more brilliant.
Could this be Madame Li? The expression on his face was a little surprised, but it was just right. It seemed normal, but those who knew him knew what this expression meant. The young men looked at each other and were slightly moved. It was obvious that young Duke Qin had taken a fancy to Madame Li. Moreover, with his relationship with Li Xianzi, they were afraid that he would not give up until he achieved his goal. With his personality, if he were to do something in secret, not even Prince Li Xian would be able to stop him. Qin Yu walked 2 steps closer to Li Yi and patted him on the shoulder. With a smile on his face, he whispered in his ear, "Madame Li Xianzi is really good." Although he was smiling, his voice was incomparably cold. The young men did not know what he said and looked slightly puzzled. Rui glanced at Qin Yu.
Her expression did not change, but her eyes widened and a terrifying aura emerged.
Li Yi also smiled.
This smile was somewhat inexplicable in the eyes of the young men, but in Qin Yu's eyes, it gave him a bad feeling. Just as this thought arose in his mind, he saw that the smile suddenly disappeared and then became incomparably cold.
An afterimage rapidly enlarged in Qin Yu's eyes. The next moment, it fell on his face. The severe pain instantly drowned his consciousness. Qin Yu staggered and fell to the ground. "Who do you think you are?
How dare you insult His Majesty?"
Li Yi looked at Qin Yu and said coldly. This slap came so suddenly that the young men behind Qin Yu were dumbfounded. What the hell was going on? Why did it suddenly involve insulting His Majesty? Could it be that what young Duke Qin said in that man's ear was insulting His Majesty? That was impossible. No matter how crazy Madman Qin was, he would never dare to do such a disgraceful thing. Bah! Qin Yu spat out a mouthful of blood. He felt that a few teeth in his mouth had loosened.
Half of his face had lost feeling and seemed to have swollen.
He supported his body and slowly stood up. He could no longer maintain the smile on his face.
He stood there and looked at Li Yi without any expression.
Only a murderous intent flashed in his eyes.
He did not expect that the other party would dare to make a move in the palace under the watchful eyes of the public.
Moreover, even if he had some skills,
He had to admit that he could not have avoided that slap.
Young Duke. Several young men hurriedly ran to Qin Yu's side. Seeing that half of his face was swollen like a pig's head, they immediately turned around and pointed at Li Yi.
They shouted angrily, "How dare you commit murder in the palace?"
Guards, guards. There would be a team of guards patrolling the palace at regular intervals. In reality, before the young man shouted, a team of guards had already trotted over. The palace was originally an important place. Tonight was a special time, so there could not be any trouble. The leader of the guards took out his weapon, and a dozen people immediately surrounded the place. Quick! This person intends to assassinate young Duke Qin. Quickly arrest him.
Before the leader of the guards could speak, a young man pointed at Li Yi and shouted.
The leader of the guards naturally did not believe that it was an assassination. No one dared to do so in the palace. Moreover, the person he pointed at did not even have a weapon. As for young Duke Qin, that slap was really ruthless. It was only a fight between the playboys. This was very normal. The leader of the guards quickly relaxed. What happened? The next moment, he asked with a serious face. He was a palace guard. Even if the other party was the young duke, he did not need to care. If the conflict between the two could not be resolved, he would simply arrest them and leave them for His Majesty to deal with. Didn't you see? He wants to assassinate young Duke Qin. Quickly arrest him. The people around Qin Yu were also children of influential families. Although their families could not compare to the Qin family, to be able to appear here, they would not be too inferior. When facing the leader of the guards, they were completely bossy and bossy. Qin Yu publicly insulted His Majesty. Does he not deserve to be beaten? Li Yi looked at the few people and said lightly, "Nonsense. When did the young duke insult His Majesty? Why did we not hear it?"
"You are simply framing him."
Hearing this, the leader of the guards glanced at Li Yi. He thought that this person was not someone to be trifled with. If this crime of great disrespect was carried out, not only would young Duke Qin's beating be in vain, there might be other troubles. However, although young Duke Qin was notorious, he still had a relationship with Prime Minister Qin. Even the leader of the guards did not want to offend him too much.
With a serious face, he was about to speak to another young man when the young man took out a token from his sleeve and waved it in front of the leader's eyes.
He said, "Tell me, just because he is young Duke Qin, he can insult His Majesty?" Seeing that token, the leader of the guards was startled. His expression immediately became solemn and he said in a deep voice, "Sir, the crime of great disrespect cannot be committed by anyone." Chapter 392. The young men in front of Qin Yu didn't see clearly what had happened, but the guard leader's attitude suddenly changed. Did he forget that the person standing in front of him was young Duke Qin? Li Yi had only heard about the function of this token from the old eunuch Changda, but he didn't expect it to be so useful. No wonder he had such a disdainful expression when he said that he could make a scene in the capital. This token was really a good thing for this guard to treat Qin Yu's grandson like this. Young Duke Qin, this is the imperial palace. Please be careful with your words and actions. The guard leader warned Qin Yu with a sullen face. He didn't take any drastic action. After all, this young man with the intelligence division token could ignore Qin Yu, but he couldn't ignore him. "You!" A young man in front of Qin Yu was about to speak angrily, but Qin Yu patted him on the shoulder and walked forward. He looked at Li Yi, cupped his fists and said calmly, "I admire you, I admire you. People always say that I, Qin Yu, am a madman, but it turns out that Li Xianzi and I are the same kind of people." "No, no, no." Li Yi shook his head and said, "I'm not as abnormal as young Duke Qin. I admit that I underestimated you."
Qin Yu spat out another mouthful of blood and squinted at Li Yi.
"Don't worry, it won't happen again. We will meet again soon. Is this a threat?" Li Yi looked at him and asked, "What do you think?" Although half of Qin Yu's face was swollen, he still squeezed out a strange smile. "If that's the case." Li Yi sighed and used his true qi to slap the other half of Qin Yu's face. He said coldly, "Young Duke Qin, how can you insult His Majesty again?" This time, Qin Yu directly fell to the ground, and several teeth even flew out of his mouth.
He could no longer laugh, nor could he speak, because he had already fainted.
Although there was only a trace of true qi in Li Yi's body, if it was channeled to a specific part of his body, it could explode with extraordinary power. The young men were dumbfounded. How could he play such a trick in front of so many people? Did they really think that the Imperial Guards were blind?
One of them pointed at the leader of the guards and said, "Look, look! He slandered young Duke Qin just like that."
Did you see that? The guard leader's face stiffened. He roughly understood what had just happened. In Jingdo, there truly were people who acted even more arrogantly than Duke Qin. Duke Qin, who had never been at a disadvantage, had no power to retaliate in front of him.
"The few of you bring young Duke Qin away." He waved his hand at the other guards and instructed. Before the other young men could open their mouths, they were glared at by the leader of the guards.
Then he smiled bitterly at the young man and said, "Sir, even if you don't give Duke Qin face, you still have to give Prime Minister Qin face. Otherwise, it will be hard to explain to His Majesty." To be able to take out that token meant that he was one of the Emperor's people. Who knew if this matter had the Emperor's intentions? Thus, the leader of the guard's attitude was very polite. Li Yi waved his hand. The 2 slaps just now were already very satisfying. He couldn't kill that disgusting guy here. Without even looking at Qin Yu, he turned and left with Rui.
The leader of the guards let out a sigh of relief.
As long as it didn't involve that special place or those special people, the matter would always be easily resolved. As for what young Duke Qin wanted to do in the future, that was his own business. "You guys, be gentler." The other nobles finally realized that there seemed to be some inside story that they didn't know about. They didn't dare to be arrogant anymore and followed closely behind the guards. That person didn't even care about young Duke Qin, so why would he care about them? "Is he that young Duke Qin?" The 2 of them walked side by side. Rui asked softly as she walked. Li Yi nodded. Rui also knew what happened last night.
It had to be said that although the 2 slaps just now still made his palms a little numb, he was really happy in his heart, so much so that his mood became a lot better. He was not a generous person and was not used to holding grudges in his heart. It was best if he could take revenge on the spot. If he couldn't do it on the spot, he would do it as soon as possible. Otherwise, he would always keep it in his heart. It was suffocating. Rui said softly, "I also feel that he is not a good person." When others said, "not a good person," it was just a statement or ridicule. But whether it was said by Rui or Rui, it had another meaning. Although Rui was usually gentle and demure, if one really counted, she had killed many people, even far more than Mississippi Liu. In the early years, she had killed all the outlaws wanted by the government. In her opinion, Qin Yu might not be much different from them. "What took you so long?" A familiar voice came from the front. Li Yi looked up and saw Li Xian walking over quickly. "Hello, sister-in-law." He first cupped his hands and bowed to Rui, then looked at Li Yi and asked, "I saw Qin Yu pass by here. You didn't see him, did you?" "I saw him." Li Yi nodded and said. "He didn't say anything?" Li Xian asked doubtfully. Li Yi thought for a moment and said, "I don't think he didn't." Li Xian shook his head, thinking that this was the Imperial Palace. Even if Qin Yu had 10 times the guts, he wouldn't dare to do anything here. He put this matter to the back of his mind and said, "I have a new idea." After saying this, he turned his head and looked at the woman behind him, saying, "Qin heir, you and sister-in-law go to Her Highness' place first. When the banquet is over, we will go find you." The princess nodded and walked to Rui's side. She very naturally held her hand and smiled, saying, "Sister, let's go in first. This is the princess, Li Xian's wife." Rui had never seen the princess before, so Li Yi introduced her to her. Rui nodded and said, "Then we will go first." Seeing the 2 walk into the Phoenix Cry Palace, Li Xian couldn't wait to pull Li Yi in the direction of Yonghe Palace. As they walked, he said, "I have a new idea. As long as there is an open ground, it will be fine. We don't need to jump down from a high place, but we can fly higher and it will be easier to control. This method seems to be more suitable on the battlefield." "You want to use a galloping horse as a driving force to pull the kite up?" Li Yi casually asked. Li Xian's footsteps stopped and a sense of defeat immediately appeared on his face. He then looked at Li Yi bitterly and asked, "Do you know why you didn't tell me earlier? Do you know how long it took me to think of this?" Li Yi couldn't bear to hurt him and said, "I just thought of it."
To be able to think of this, you are already very amazing. Chapter 393. When it came to Li Xian, Li Yi had always adhered to the principle of, if you don't ask, I won't tell. If you tell, I'll tell. With Li Xian's perpetually high curiosity signal, all he had to do was throw a few modern physics textbooks at him, and he would be deeply engrossed in it. This guy even called her Qiner just now. It seemed that the strategy of consort was very effective. He couldn't bring him back to that path of no return. Li Xian's frustration only lasted for a moment before he put it to the back of his mind. He began to discuss with Li Yi how his idea should be implemented and the various details. He even took out an intricate drawing from his sleeve. The two of them sat at a table in the corner and discussed in low voices. The old emperor's banquet was held in Yonghe Palace. However, a small palace couldn't accommodate so many people. To ensure that there was enough space, the palace was filled with short tables that extended all the way to the open space outside the palace. Those who didn't have the status to enter the palace could only sit in the open space outside the palace. Even so, it was still a great honor for them. Li Yi could be considered to have a small status now. If he were to be ranked, he would at least be able to occupy a small spot in the palace. At this time, the banquet hadn't officially started and the emperor hadn't arrived yet. Many of the officials were like him and Li Xian, chatting and laughing in low voices. With nothing to do, Li Yi's gaze fell on the drawing that Li Xian had spread on the table. After a moment of shock, he said, "This drawing was drawn by you? I haven't seen you for a few days, and you've improved a lot." Although Li Yi, who was from an engineering background, had forgotten all his previous professional knowledge, drawing was a basic ability that he had not lost until now. Especially after studying drawing, his level was several levels higher than before. The drawings that Li Xian drew in the past could only be called concept drawings. They were ugly beyond belief. It had only been a few days since they last met, but he was able to draw such a neat drawing that it looked like a work of art. How could this improvement be described with the word fast? Li Xian laughed dryly and said, "Of course I didn't draw this. Qiner is skilled in the art of painting, so I asked her to draw it for me." Li Yi shook his head. Qiner and Qina were so intimate. It was really not easy for His Highness to be enlightened in this aspect. From the perspective of a friend, Li Yi felt very gratified. Finally, he didn't have to worry about his sexual orientation or whether he would have designs on him. Li Xian was the crown prince and was highly valued by the emperor, so his seat was naturally not next to Li Yi's. However, a fifth-ranked official next to Li Yi had been kicked off somewhere by Li Xian, so he naturally occupied the other's seat. "How much do you know about Qin Yu?" Li Yi casually asked. Li Xian furrowed his brows and said, "This person is a complete scoundrel, or perhaps a madman. He does things without any rules, like a mad dog. When he's angry, he doesn't distinguish between friend and foe. If it was just him, naturally no one would be afraid of him, but with the addition of Prime Minister Qin's manor, there aren't many people in the capital who are willing to offend him." Li Yi asked again, "In the entire capital, is there really no one who can control him?" Li Xian shook his head and said, "That's not the case. The problem is that although Qin Yu is arrogant, it's only because he doesn't cultivate morality. He doesn't touch the interests of the nobles. Out of respect for Prime Minister Qin, very few people are willing to meddle in his affairs. On the other hand, Prime Minister Qin is very strict with him. Every time he causes trouble, he will be grounded at home for a period of time. However, after he is released, he is still the same. To tell the truth, when it comes to that mad dog, even I don't want to have anything to do with him." Li Xian looked at him and said, "However, you don't have to worry. His methods are useless on you. Furthermore, with his personality, he didn't say or do anything just now. It's clear that he doesn't care about you." In Li Xian's view, the person who offended Qin Yu the most last night was himself. The person Qin Yu hated the most was presumably him. This was also the reason why he made a move. "He didn't do anything." Li Yi smiled and said, "It's just that I slapped him twice just now, knocked out a few of his teeth, and knocked him unconscious." Li Xian looked at him. The host of tonight's banquet was, of course, the old emperor. In reality, as long as it was in the Jing kingdom, no matter the occasion, he was the only host. However, tonight, in addition to Emperor Jing, who was shining as always, there was another person who was also shining brightly. It was a middle-aged man with a thin face. He was not tall and was sitting in front of the generals. Even when Emperor Jing praised him in front of all the civil and military officials, he still had a solemn expression on his face. It seemed that he was out of tune with the atmosphere of tonight's banquet. However, no one thought that he was abnormal because he was the most serious person in the Jing kingdom. Because he was Su Dingyuan, the god of war of the Jing kingdom. It was also the first time that Li Yi saw this legendary general.
However, because he was a little far away, he could only see a silhouette and could not see what he looked like.
Fortunately, he was not curious about the god of war's appearance. Instead, he was more interested in the singing and dancing in the middle of the hall. The standard of the court musicians and dancers was not just for show. As the king of a country, he definitely wanted to keep the best things in the palace. These entertainment programs were many times more professional than what Li Yi had seen in the brothel. Li Xian clearly didn't have the same level of appreciation. At this moment, he was still muttering, "With that madman's personality, you guys won't rest until you're dead. Who knows what that madman will do? Why don't you just kill him secretly?" Li Xian turned to look at Li Yi and said, "You have a lot of evil ideas. Think about how to kill him secretly. That guy, once he is dead, everything will be over. Your Highness, who do you want to kill? Do you need my help?" A rough voice came from behind. Li Xian was shocked and quickly turned his head.
When he saw the old man in luxurious clothes standing behind him, he smiled awkwardly and said, "General Shui, you misheard me. I am the supervisor, how could I do that kind of thing? Looks like this old man is getting old. My ears aren't as good." The white-haired old man with a ruddy complexion laughed and said, "This is General Shui." To cover up his embarrassment, Li Xian hurriedly introduced him to Li Yi. He only said this because he believed that Li Yi must have heard of General Shui's name. If General Su Dingyuan was the current god of war of the Jing kingdom, then before him, this title had always belonged to the old man in front of him. As long as it was a citizen of the Jing kingdom, who had not heard of his name?
Even General Su was a student taught by him. General Shui? Li Yi was stunned for a moment.
When he regained his senses, he immediately stood up and said, "Greetings, old General Shui."
"Haha, old Shui. Let's see what you can brag about in the future. What do you mean by the national general that everyone knows in the Jing kingdom? I have never heard of your name."
Another burst of laughter came from behind.
Soon, a few figures walked in front of the three of them. General Shui, who had spoken earlier, now had a face as black as the bottom of a pot.
There was a hint of shame and anger on his face as he stared at Li Yi with his bell-like eyes and said loudly, "Boy, have you really not heard of my name?"
Chapter 394. He was indeed a general.
Although the old man was old, his body was still strong.
Although his eyes were as big as copper bells, he did not look imposing. However, Li Yi did not understand. He was not born and raised in this world, so how would he know the name of this old general? He was not Shui Rengue or Shui Jiqian.
It was not strange that he did not know his name since he had never heard of his stories or songs.
"Aya, the moonlight tonight is not bad. Old General Shui, please have a seat. I'll go out and look at the moon for a while." "Excuse me." Li Yi, cleverly, changed the topic.
He did not want to embarrass the old general or himself.
"Ha ha ha ha." The people behind General Shui laughed even louder. They also felt that this young man was too ignorant for not knowing Shui Wanqing's name.
After all, for a young man of his age, he should have heard of this name since he was a child. However, being able to personally witness the most arrogant fellow among them being humiliated made them feel rather delighted.
"This is General Shui Wanqing." Li Xian reminded him in a low voice. There was only one General Shui in the Jing kingdom. If Li Yi did not know him, he could not do anything about it. "Ah, it's General Shui." Li Yi revealed an expression of sudden realization and hurriedly said, "Old General Shui, please don't blame me. This is the first time I've attended a banquet of this level, so I was a little nervous and didn't remember. Old General Shui's name is really well known. I've heard of your deeds since I was young. To be able to meet you today is really the honor of 3 lifetimes." Who didn't know how to say polite words? From the looks of it, this old general was really a celebrity. In order to express the joy and excitement of a fan meeting his idol, Li Yi felt that he had used all the acting skills he had learned in 2 lifetimes.
If it was not for the fact that autographs were not popular in this era, he could have acted more realistically.
Oh, then why don't you tell me what I've done?
The old man stroked his beard and seemed to have accepted Li Yi's explanation.
After all, there were not many people in this generation who had not heard of his name. He casually asked another question. A black line appeared on Li Yi's face once again. Was this old man looking for an awkward situation?
He suddenly laughed again and looked out of the hall. He praised, "The moon tonight is really nice." Old General Shui exerted some force and pulled a few strands of beard from his chin.
Li Yi and Li Xian were surrounded by a group of generals. I say, was Tianfa really created by you? The famous General Shui sat in front of Li Yi and said as he tore apart a juicy chicken leg.
Li Yi didn't dare to say that the reason the drumstick was still there was because he had accidentally dropped it on the ground. Hearing his words, Li Yi glanced at the old emperor's seat and didn't say a word.
Even if Li Xian asked him about this, he would not be able to get any useful information. Hearing the 2 words, divine punishment, Li Xian's spirit was clearly aroused. He hurriedly pricked up his ears to listen. Not bad, kid.
Remember, you can't tell anyone except His Majesty.
General Shui nodded and said with satisfaction. But, after he said that, he suddenly changed the topic and said, that thing belongs to the military.
Although we don't know the formula, the old guys here know better than anyone else how many things it can contain and how many people it can kill.
You don't have to hide it. Only then did Li Yi realize that the people present were the most senior group of people in the Jing Kingdom's military.
Other than the formula that the emperor would not tell them, there was no way he could hide anything else from them.
Since that was the case, there was nothing to worry about. Li Yi said straightforwardly, that's right. That thing was created by me. Well done. Another old general patted his knee and did not hide the admiration on his face. His Majesty is becoming more and more stingy, but he is only rewarded with a Viscount title. Another old general ridiculed him and asked, I heard that horseshoes were also created by you. I think so. The method to save people on the battlefield was also created by you? Maybe. Li Yi thought to himself. A general was indeed a general. Even his words were so direct. The words created and created were too crude. Think about it. Do you want to train in the military for a few years?
General Shui stared at him with shining eyes and said, Such a good seedling, it would be a pity not to put you in the military.
With you, there will be fewer soldiers sacrificed. I will let Ding Yuan teach you personally. Who knows, maybe in a few years, the Jing Kingdom will have the youngest general in history. Li Yi's eyelids twitched. It was already scary enough to be an official in the imperial court. What would happen if he were to enter the military? How long would it take to see Rui if he had to face a bunch of rough men every day?
Moreover, who would be willing to be taught by that stern face?
He rejected old General Shui's suggestion without even thinking about it.
When he habitually looked at the moon outside the hall, General Shui impatiently waved his hand and said, Stop looking.
There is no moon tonight. Li Yi retracted his gaze and picked up the teacup on the table.
He carefully examined it and could not help but exclaim, The workmanship of this cup is really exquisite.
I wonder where it was made. General Shui's face darkened and said, Just like what His Majesty said, you are a little kid. You are so young but you are so ambitious. How many people have begged for it, but you do not care. Are you planning to be a lousy county magistrate for the rest of your life? Ah, what material are these chopsticks made of? Don't tell me they are made of jade? This is the palace after all.
Even chopsticks are so luxurious.
The few old generals looked at each other speechlessly. They knew that their plan to recruit him into the military was going to fail. Horseshoes, heavenly punishment, and even the method to save the injured soldiers. Every one of these matters was extremely important to them. If such a person could not be used by the military, even the heavens would not allow it.
When they first made this request to His Majesty had said that as long as they could get his consent, he could be trained in the military.
They thought that it would be a simple matter if they worked together. Who would have thought that when faced with old Shui's straightforward recruitment, he would actually study the teacup and chopsticks? No matter how much they had prepared, it was useless in this situation. If it was someone else, they would not care so much. They would first kidnap him into the military. Once there,
His Majesty's words would not be of any use. However, His Majesty had clearly said that they were not to force this young man in front of them. If they did not force him, they would not know where to start. Even when they were surrounded by the enemy, the few old generals had not had such a headache.
Chapter 395. Forget it, forget it. If you don't want to go to the army, I won't force you. But remember, if you encounter any problems in the future, you can come to us old fellows. Let's not talk about other things, but we can protect you in the capital.
Just as Li Yi was about to go against his conscience and praise the table in front of him for being rare, old General Shui seemed to have given up and finally waved his hand.
There's still one thing that I don't understand. Li Yi finally regained his composure as he looked at old General Shui. You want to ask us why we old fellows are so nice to you? Old General Shui asked without even lifting his head.
Li Yi thought to himself that these old generals weren't as rash and boorish as they appeared to be.
Their words and actions were clear and logical, and they could even think of things that he couldn't think of. After all, they were old men who had lived for decades and were older than both of Li Yi's lifetimes combined. They could see through Li Yi's thoughts with a single glance. The old fox had grown into an old fox. When he met these old generals or old men in the future, he must not underestimate them.
You'll understand when you actually arrive on the battlefield, old General Shui said faintly as a look of reminiscence appeared on his face. No one knew better than these old generals how powerful the thing he had invented was on the battlefield. Which of the old generals present hadn't killed their way out of a mountain of corpses and a sea of blood?
They had experienced countless battles in their lives. Without them, the Jing kingdom wouldn't have existed. In every battle, it was their brothers and comrades who sacrificed themselves. The family of generals had been on the decline since ancient times. No one knew when or where a descendant of the family of generals would die on the battlefield. The young man in front of them had given them a huge gift. A huge gift. Compared to this huge gift, a small repayment was not worth mentioning at all. It was just that Li Yi hadn't realized this yet. As he watched the old generals leave, Li Xian immediately cast an envious gaze over. For old General Shui to say such words, it means that he really values you. With so many old generals standing behind you, you can do whatever you want in the capital city in the future. Li Xian was really envious. These old generals had fought for the country all their lives. Their fathers, themselves, and their descendants had all done their best for the country. What they did was the most dangerous and important thing. Because of this, His Majesty attached great importance to the family of generals. It could even be said that he favored them. In the capital, these old generals were unreasonable existences. Even if Li Xian met them, he would have to be respectful. Li Yi inexplicably received the old general's promise. Apart from feeling surprised, he was also happy. He looked at Li Xian and asked, "Walk sideways? Does that mean that the next time I meet the king of Shu, I can slap him hard?" Li Xian was stunned for a moment. It took him a while to react.
He shook his head and said, "The king of Shu is a prince.
His face is the face of the royal family. If you slap him, you will be slapping the royal family.
The king of Shu will not forgive you, and neither will Uncle Huang."
"Is that so?"
Li Yi couldn't help but feel a little disappointed. Other than slapping the king of Shu, he didn't seem to have anything else that he wanted to do but couldn't.
Then he thought of something and asked, "What about killing Qin Yu?" When Li Xian heard this, he immediately became interested. He whispered, "That's possible, but you have to do it secretly. Don't get caught. Prime Minister Qin isn't someone to be trifled with. If something really happens, even Uncle Huang won't be able to protect us. In short, this matter can't be done hastily. We have to plan it carefully." Just as Li Yi and Li Xian were discussing how to kill Madman Qin without being discovered, on the other side of the hall, Prime Minister Qin was chatting with a few other officials. Then he walked back to his seat, looked around the hall, and furrowed his brows. At this moment, a young man hurriedly came from behind and said, "Grandfather Qin, it's bad." "Young Duke Qin, What did this bastard do this time?"
After a moment, Prime Minister Qin frowned and looked in a certain direction at the entrance of the hall.
"I think it's a good idea to hire someone to kill Qin Yu. Qin Yu doesn't have many guards. If we hire a powerful assassin with a lot of money, we can make him disappear forever. Even if we are caught, they won't be able to find out our identities." Qin Yu has too many enemies, and there are too many people who want him dead. Li Xian felt that he had come up with a brilliant idea. In his complacency, he raised his voice. However, he didn't notice that an official dressed in a scarlet official's robe was already dumbfounded. Through his idea, Li Yi summed up 18 ways for young Duke Qin to die.
He inadvertently raised his head and seemed to see someone looking in his direction.
When he looked carefully, he only saw the figures of a few unfamiliar officials. The feeling just now seemed to have never appeared.
He shook his head and began to think about other things.
He had Li Xian to accompany him here, so he had someone to talk to. He didn't know how Rui was doing. Young princess was born in a rich family and should not have much in common with her. He didn't know if she would be bored. The hall was full of singing and dancing, and it seemed that no one was paying attention to this side.
Li Yi sneaked out. He had just stepped out of the hall and walked a few steps when he heard a faint voice behind him. Even if Qin Yu has offended you in some way, isn't it too heavy for the county magistrate of Chang'an? Li Yi looked back and saw an old man in plain clothes standing behind him.
The old man said calmly.
The old man's clothes were very ordinary, and his appearance was even more ordinary. Only his eyes were particularly sharp, as if they could see through people's hearts at a glance.
Prime Minister Qin?
Li Yi stopped and looked at the old man.
The old man didn't admit or deny it.
After a moment, Li Yi smiled and said, Prime Minister Qin, you know what kind of person Qin Yu is.
I think you have a conclusion in your mind whether I was heavy or not. Why do you say this? The old man frowned slightly. He was a righteous man. If others had done those things, he would have already stopped them. However, when it involved the only legitimate son of the Qin family, he naturally couldn't treat him as an ordinary person. When he made a mistake, he could punish him however he wanted. In fact, he had always been strict with Qin Yu at home. However, he didn't want to let outsiders do these things for him. Li Yi didn't defend himself.
He directly tore apart all the concealment and went straight to his heart. As the Prime Minister, he must know better than anyone else what was right or wrong, right or wrong.
This bastard! Prime Minister Qin cursed in his heart. Naturally, he thought of some dirty things and thought that maybe he should discipline him well. Otherwise, the reputation that the Qin family had accumulated for decades would be ruined in his hands. However, being questioned by a young man in his face, Prime Minister Qin still felt a little embarrassed. He snorted coldly, turned around, and walked back in. Li Yi curled his lips. This old man still cared about his face. His impression in Li Yi's heart slightly increased by 0.01 points. He didn't know if the Empress's birthday banquet was over. He walked out of the hall and took a look. No one came out, so it should still be in progress.
When he was about to sneak back, he suddenly stopped and saw a small figure sitting on the corner of the steps of Yonghe Palace in the night.
Chapter 396. Li Yi walked over slowly. The palace maids and eunuchs guarding Princess Yongning looked up and bowed slightly to him. They didn't stop him. In this world, among all the people the little princess had met, only this young county magistrate wouldn't make her feel repulsed. Li Yi sat down next to her. Princess Yongning looked back and then turned back to look at the lights in front of her. There was no expression on her little face. Li Yi looked at her eyes carefully. Even in the dark, there was light in them, but there was no life in them.
He had seen closed and depressed eyes before, and they seemed to be different from the eyes in front of him.
This made Li Yi feel that the situation wasn't that bad. It seemed that she just didn't want to talk to people. Of course, this was something to be happy about. Li Yi sat for a while, then stood up and walked into the hall. The little girl's face was slightly tilted at an unnoticeable angle. The light in her eyes dimmed slightly.
She grabbed the hem of her robe a little harder, then quickly loosened it.
After a while, she stood up and prepared to walk to the palace in the distance. It was dark and quiet there. She wouldn't go there unless she was sleeping. Are you leaving? A familiar voice suddenly came from behind. She stopped in her tracks and slowly turned around. Li Yi had a chicken leg in his mouth and 2 plates in his hands. He put them on the well-lit steps. Hurry up, hurry up. He waved at Li Xian, who was also holding something in his hands. Although Li Xian's eyes were puzzled, he still put the things on the steps. Okay, put the things down and you can go back. All right, See if there's any grape wine on the table. Forget it, wine is still wine. I don't need it. Li Yi waved his hand and said to him. Li Xian didn't care about Li Yi's behavior. Instead, he was surprised by the way Li Yi acted. He looked at Princess Yongning in surprise and turned to leave. Do you want some? Li Yi handed a pair of chopsticks to the little girl. When he was sitting inside, he actually didn't have much appetite. He wasn't interested in even the most exquisite dishes. Instead, he felt that eating on the steps outside was more atmosphere, mainly because it was quiet. There wouldn't be Li Xian nagging by his ear, and there wouldn't be those old generals bothering him. Princess Yongning didn't speak. Until now, Li Yi hadn't heard her say even a word. I have to leave for a while, Li Yi said as he ate. So, we might not see each other for a long time. When I come back, I'll treat you to a good meal. Yongning only lowered her head to eat and did not respond to Li Yi's words. Li Yi was already used to this kind of silence. Seeing that she liked to eat the dish next to him, he switched the dish next to her. Then he put down his chopsticks and quietly looked at the palace wall in the distance. From time to time, there would be some noise coming from inside the palace. In the distance, there was a tall palace wall that stretched as far as the eye could see. It was like a cage, causing people to involuntarily have a suffocating feeling. At this time, Li Yi thought of something he hadn't thought of for a long time. He had been here for half a year. What was the other world like? Forgetting was human nature. Except for a few people, no one remembered who he was. When he first came to this world, he would think about how to go back almost every day. It had been a long time since he had thought about this. At this moment, he did not immerse himself in such emotions for long, because people started coming out of the palace behind him. The banquet was over. Li Yi stood up and waved to the little girl. See you next time. When he walked outside, a middle-aged palace maid came over and begged, I hope you can come to the palace often to see the little princess. It's not easy for the little princess. Li Yi looked at her and nodded. He looked back at the little girl sitting on the steps and walked to Li Xian, who was waving at him. Just as he disappeared behind a wall, Princess Yongning stood up. Several eunuchs and palace maids hurried over and led her to the depths of the palace. As if it had been planned, the banquet of the old emperor and empress ended at the same time. When Li Yi and Li Xian walked to the front of the Phoenix Cry Palace, they saw the women coming out of the palace. There were quite a few people waiting outside the hall like them. After all, many of the people who came to the imperial palace tonight were husband and wife. Li Yi and Li Xian waited until almost everyone had left before the figures of the crown princess and Rui appeared in their line of sight. To be more accurate, it was not 2 people, but 3. When Li Yi saw the woman and Rui walking side by side, his body shook. Surprise and astonishment flashed across his face. Then, his expression became extremely complicated. How could it be her? Although she was about the same age as his aunt, the last time he saw her, she had only been in her early 20s. Now, she was so haggard, particularly from the white hair occasionally peeking out from her temples. It was difficult to imagine what she had experienced during this period of time. If there were people in Jingdo that Li Yi did not want to face, Qinyu would not be in the top 10, and the old emperor would not be first. This young lady of the Chen family was the one he did not want to see the most. Since he had accepted Li Yi's identity, when he met this young lady of the Chen family, he could not help but feel guilty. Normal people would not be able to understand this kind of feeling. Even if the original owner of this body was still alive, he would not be able to understand the conflicting and complicated feelings in his heart. It was nothing, don't worry about it. When Rui walked over, she was still smiling and talking to the woman. The woman only smiled. When she saw a certain figure standing not too far away, her body trembled slightly, and a hint of excitement flashed in her eyes. Soon after, she seemed to have thought of something, and that hint of excitement quickly disappeared, replaced by a hint of pain. My husband and Li Xianzi are already waiting for us there. The crown princess smiled and looked at the woman. I don't know if your family has come. We will be leaving first. The woman nodded and then raised her head to look at Li Yi. She said, Your wife is very good. You know my husband? Rui looked at her with some surprise and asked. This time, the woman did not reply. She walked forward on her own and quickly disappeared from everyone's sight. Husband this.
Rui looked at the woman's departing figure and then looked at Li Yi. Her heart was filled with confusion.
It's a long story. We will talk about it when we get back.
Li Yi sighed and felt inexplicably suffocated in his heart. Seeing such a story in an opera would not be able to move people much. However, when it really happened in front of his eyes and he saw the change of the woman in just a few days, from her beautiful face to her old face, from her fine black hair to her white hair, Li Yi could only sigh in his heart and curse his sins.
Li Minghan, you are a motherfastrous king bastard.
In the end, he could not help but curse in a low voice.
Who is a bastard? Li Xian turned his head to look at Li Yi in confusion. He thought that even Qin Yu had not been scolded like this.
It seemed that the person he cursed just now must have offended him greatly.
Chapter 397. Just now, a palace maid dropped a tray and almost hit that lady. I happened to be next to her, so I just happened to help her.
Later, she took the initiative to tell me many things about the capital. Does my husband know that lady?
In the carriage, Rui told Li Yi about what had just happened. Li Yi sighed.
There was no need to hide this matter from Rui. He told her the cause and effect of the matter from beginning to end.
Something like this happened?
Rui was shocked. She didn't expect that the lady she got along well with just now would have such a grudge against the Li family, and it even involved her late father-in-law. This was the first time she heard about the past, so she felt a little sad. She felt that the lady was too pitiful, but she didn't curse like Mississippi Lou. Seeing that Li Yi seemed to be a little depressed, she quickly comforted him. My husband, you don't need to blame yourself too much. After all, you weren't born at that time. It's not your fault.
Seeing her like this, I still feel a little sad, Li Yi said.
Because my husband is a good person.
Rui smiled and said, even if this didn't happen to us, my husband would still feel bad. Li Yi shook his head.
Li Minghan had already passed away, so this matter had become a dead knot that couldn't be untied.
Even if he felt a little guilty, he couldn't do anything about it.
He drove this thought out of his mind, looked down at Rui, and revealed an evil smile.
He whispered, whether your husband is a good person or not, you'll know tonight. Rui was stunned when she heard this. Then, she seemed to think of something, and her pretty face began to burn.
Our Qin family's face has been completely lost because of you. In the Qin family, a middle-aged man in a brocade robe pointed at Qin Yu, who was sitting in the hall, and said angrily,
how can the Qin family lose face for me? Both sides of Qin Yu's face were still swollen, making him look quite miserable. Facing the middle-aged man's reprimand, he didn't mind it at all. He picked up the teacup beside him and took a sip.
You unfilial son, what did you say?
The veins on the middle-aged man's forehead bulged as he strode over. He raised his hand, but when he saw Qin Yu's swollen cheek, he didn't lower his hand.
Enough.
Qin Xiang, who had been silent all this time, finally spoke. He looked at Qin Yu with disappointment and said, recently, there has been a storm in the imperial court. Our Qin family has also been involved. You'd better restrain yourself. Qin Xiang didn't say anything about Qin Yu's injury. He subconsciously thought that his grandson had done something shameless again. If this matter was blown out of proportion, he was afraid that it would be even more difficult to clean up.
After this incident, it might not be a bad thing for him to restrain himself a little and be fearful of him.
Restrain? A sarcastic smile appeared on Qin Yu's face as he said, when you killed my mother in front of me, did you ever think of restraining yourself? Unfilial son, what did you say? The middle-aged man's body shook when he heard this. He fiercely slammed the table next to him and grabbed Qin Yu's collar. His eyes looked like they were about to pop out of their sockets. What? Did I say something wrong? The sarcastic expression on Qin Yu's face became even stronger. He didn't fear the middle-aged man at all, even if the other party was his father. The faces of several core members of the Qin family in the hall suddenly changed. They were also one of the participants in that incident, so how could they not remember? The Qin family's scholarly family valued reputation and chastity the most. How could a woman who didn't abide by the rules of a woman become the first wife of the Qin family? A family's shame shouldn't be aired in public. That incident couldn't be made public, and it also couldn't tarnish the Qin family's reputation. So, including the head of the family at that time, they strangled the woman to death in front of the Qin family's ancestors.
However, who would have thought that Qin Yu, who was only 8 years old at that time, was hiding under the table in front of him and watching his mother being strangled to death by his father with his grandfather and uncle standing to the side. This matter had almost become a taboo in the Qin family.
At this time, when Qin Yu brought it up again, everyone felt that they had lost face. Because of Qin Yu, the Qin family had lost face in front of outsiders many times. Qin Xiang closed his eyes, and the blue veins on the back of his skinny hand constantly pulsed.
After a long time, he squeezed out a few words from between his teeth. Qin Yu is grounded at home for half a year.
Without my permission, he is not allowed to take a step out of the Qin family.
After saying this, he slowly stood up and quickly disappeared from the hall with the help of an old servant.
Everyone, including the middle-aged man, after glancing at Qin Yu, also stood up and left. Qin Yu reached out and touched his cheek.
Because of the pain, the corners of his mouth twitched instinctively.
He said with some regret, "Half a year, it's really a bit long. It's not easy for an interesting person to appear in the capital. What a pity, what a pity."
Early in the morning in the Viscount's mansion, a servant girl suddenly screamed from a room. Hearing the sound, the housekeeper, Uncle Li, frowned and reprimanded. "Why are you screaming so early in the morning? If you disturb the young master and young madam, you will lose your reward for this month."
"Li, Uncle Li, Lord Ju He."
The servant girl stood at the door and stammered as she handed a letter to housekeeper Li. "A letter from the young master?" A trace of doubt appeared on Uncle Li's face as he quickly opened the letter.
Chapter 398. Caught in the act of eloping, Li Yi couldn't continue. Qing'an Prefecture and Jingdo were two of the most prosperous cities in Jing Kingdom. Naturally, there was a lot of trade between them. There were often boats on the river. They were now on a medium-sized passenger ship. When he sneaked out in the morning, he didn't alert Mississippi Lu and Xiaofan because they had left earlier than him and stayed in the compartment next to her and Rui. Only now did Li Yi remember that Xiaofan had looked at him strangely these days and often ran to Mississippi Lu's room. But because the servant girl had always been obedient, he didn't suspect anything. Now that he thought about it, they should have known about this plan a long time ago. Xiaofan might really be angry. She was still hiding far away and ignoring him. This was the first time this had happened. There was no such thing as a honeymoon in this world. They wouldn't really think that he was going to elope with Rui and abandon them, would they? Li Yi walked over and looked at her with a smile. "What's wrong, are you still angry?" Hearing the young master's voice, the servant girl's face lit up. But thinking of second Mrs. Warning, she immediately kept a straight face and turned her head away from him. Li Yi turned again and pinched her face. "Are you really angry at young master?" The servant girl's face was very fleshy. Especially when they were in Willow Village, Li Yi liked to pinch it. Later, for some reason, the days got better and better. Her cheeks were no longer as baby fat as before and slowly shrunk. Her oval face had the tendency to change into an oval face. She lost some of her cuteness but became more beautiful. The little girl was about to become a big girl. Li Yi looked at her slightly pouting little mouth. His mind was filled with the scenes of the few of them getting along in the past 6 months. At this moment, there were only 4 people in the room. It was like after going around in circles, everything had returned to square one. The servant girl finally turned her head and looked at him with large, watery eyes. She said with a sob in her voice, "Young master, do you and Miss not want us any more?" There was sadness in her voice, like a little animal that had been heartlessly abandoned. To her, that was the truth. The son-in-law and the young lady were everything to her. If they all left, leaving her and the second young lady alone in the capital, even if they could eat delicacies every day and have maids and servants to serve them, what was the point? Seeing that her eyes were filled with tears, Li Yi suddenly felt a little worried, and a strong sense of guilt welled up in his heart. He seemed to only consider him and Rui, but neglected Xiaohuan and Rui's feelings. Their way of thinking was completely different from his. Leaving without a word like this might really make them think more. No matter where young master and miss go in the future, they will take you with them. Li Yi held her shoulders and patted her gently. Really? The young maidservant's eyes were still misty. She wiped her eyes with her hands, revealing her dimples. You've stopped crying so quickly? Li Yi looked at her in surprise. You've learned to cry and act pitiful. Who taught you this? Having been exposed by Li Yi, The young maidservant blushed and ran away in a hurry. Ignoring her little thoughts, Li Yi sat back down at the table and continued his unfinished work. The distance from the capital to Qing and prefecture was not very far. Following the river, if the speed was fast, it would only take a day and a night to arrive.
However, this passenger ship was not transporting any important goods, and there was no urgent matter, so there was no need to travel so quickly.
It was leisurely and would take about 3 days to arrive. This time, Li Yi was not in a hurry. He had long wanted to see the famous mountains and rivers of this world. On the table was a simple map that he had asked Li Xian to get. The main drawing on it was the waterways between Qing and prefecture and the capital.
The maps of this world were far from being as detailed and standard as those of the future.
Usually, only the government and the imperial court would use them. The emphasis was on practicality. They were either next to mountains or next to rivers. There were no satellites, so they had to be manually measured. Li Yi marked a few asterisks on the map, representing a few important cities in the Jing kingdom. He used lines to connect them, and finally formed a map from the capital to Qing and prefecture. He planned to stop at these places for a day or two to look at the mountains, the rivers, and the scenery. He wanted to see the differences in the beauty of different places in the Jing kingdom and enjoy life. His dream in his previous life was to earn enough money to travel around the world. He wanted to see different sceneries, experience different customs, and experience the beauty of the world.
Of course, the last dream could not be realized in his previous life, and the possibility of it being realized in this life was not very high.
One should be down to earth, cherish life, and stay away from beauty.
Did the young master really leave?
Uncle Li, the housekeeper, held a letter in his hand. He was stunned, and his face was still full of disbelief. He felt that the young master's way of doing things in the past was capricious enough.
He did not expect that he still had a very shallow understanding of the young master's capriciousness.
How should he explain this to Madame Dowager?
All the maids and servants in the Viscount's mansion, including the guards, did not know when the master and madam left.
Not to mention the maids and servants, the guards might feel a burning pain on their faces. Their duty was to protect the main house. Now that everyone had run away, who were they supposed to protect? Uncle Li held the letter.
The letter only said that the young master and madam would go back to Qing and prefecture and told them not to worry.
As for when they would come back, he did not know. When he drove to the Li mansion to inform Madame Dowager, he still wanted to cry but had no tears. It was fine to leave, but at least tell them and bring a few guards. How could the master leave without saying goodbye? Madame and the others were all women. What if something happened to them? What? They left. Li Xian jumped down from the carriage and stood at the door of the Viscount's mansion. He looked at the servant and asked, "Where did they go? When will they come back?" The servant could only shake his head helplessly. He only knew that the Viscount, Madam, Second Miss, and Miss Xiaofan had all disappeared this morning. They only left a letter for housekeeper Li. As for more things, it was not something that he could come into contact with. Li Xian broke into the mansion in disbelief. After a long time, he came out with a dumbfounded face. They left just like that. He originally wanted to find Li Yi to talk about some of his new ideas and have a meal. He did not expect to receive such news. This immediately made him feel disappointed. Go back. He looked back at the Viscount's mansion and got into the carriage with some depression. They really left just like that.
Not long after, in the depths of the palace, Emperor Jing looked at the paper on the table and showed an expression of not knowing whether to laugh or cry.
Chapter 399. In the capital. There was a vast piece of flat land behind the Crown Prince's residence. 2 months ago, Li Xian had bought this piece of land. At this moment, a galloping steed galloped along a fixed route under the urging of the rider on its back. A rope was tied to the horse, which was connected to a black spot in the distant sky. A person with good eyesight would be able to see that the black dot was actually a huge kite. Under the peculiarly shaped kite was a black dog with wide, panic-stricken dog eyes. It was looking down at the mountains and rivers beneath it like a king, while cursing the 18 generations of ancestors of the guy who sent it to heaven in his heart. Even though it had flown countless times, it was still a dog. How could a dog be expected to get used to the sky? For it, flying around in the sky with its dog guts was far less interesting than doing happy things with its wife while Lao Wang was not around. Not many people cared what kind of mood the dog was in when it was flying. Several figures stood below and recorded some data on a piece of paper from time to time. There had been no problems in the experiment for half a month, which meant that they would not be able to eat dog meat hot pot for a long time. It was really a sad thing. At noon in April, the weather was sunny, but it was actually a bit hot. Craning his neck for a long time was tiring and also a bit hot. Li Xian took off his outer robe and threw it on the grass beside him. My husband, several concubines in the palace have sent people to ask what kind of perfume will be released next. The madams of those noble families have also invited me many times. The crown prince's wife walked over from a distance, followed by a faint fragrance. Smelling his favorite orchid fragrance, Li Xian was slightly refreshed and said, "Didn't I say that Uncle Huang can't smell that kind of fragrance? What do these concubines want?" A wry smile appeared on Crown Prince Consort's face. Princess Yongla, Li Xianzi, and their family had cooperated in the perfume business, which had caused an unimaginable sensation in the capital. All women, regardless of their status, were infatuated with it. Several perfume shops in the capital had already closed down a month ago. His Majesty's concubine was also a woman with the most distinguished status. How could she be inferior to ordinary people in this kind of business? Even her maiden family had hinted that they wanted to cooperate with her several times. She couldn't imagine how much profit this perfume business would bring if even the Wang family couldn't help but be tempted. However, there was no trace of Li Xianzi during this period of time. Princess Yongla never cared about the business. The perfume business had always been managed by Li Xianzi's residence. As the mistress of the Crown Prince's residence, she had received countless invitations during this period of time. Naturally, she had become unusually busy. If it was anyone else, it would be fine. However, they are all concubines after all. It's not good for them to not reply. She handed a small and exquisite wine pot to Li Xian, glanced at the black dot in the sky, and turned her head back. This matter is not urgent. Let's talk about it in a few days. Li Xian held the wine pot in his mouth and gulped down a few mouthfuls. He had learned this way of drinking from Li Yi. Of course, both of them couldn't hold their liquor well, so they could only drink the grape wine in this way. After a while he put down the wine pot, wiped his mouth and asked, "What date is it today?" The concubine thought about it and said, "April 8th. April 8th, it's been 2 months. Li Xian stared into the distance and mumbled in a low voice. "It's been 2 months. Where are they?" Inside the Hall of Diligent Government, Emperor Jing put down a document and walked out with his hands behind his back. Only after breathing in the fresh air did he feel much better. "Your Majesty, they have been in Yuezhou for 5 days. They should be arriving at the Qing'an prefecture soon." Changde stood behind Emperor Jing and said in a low voice, "What a lazy young man. I am about to die from exhaustion in the capital." He, on the other hand, played around for 2 months. "If all the officials were like him, my Jing kingdom would have fallen a long time ago," Emperor Jing complained with a smile. Emperor Jing complained with a smile. There was a hint of envy in his tone as he said, "Sometimes, I also envy him. Although I am the ruler of a country, I am far less carefree than him. How about this old servant summon him back?" Changde asked tentatively. Emperor Jing waved his hand and smiled. "Whatever. I am not going to compare myself to him. Since the beginning of time, there has never been an emperor who could live freely. However, now that he is gone, it has been a long time since someone could have a good meal with me." Changde nodded slightly. He didn't know why, but ever since His Majesty hid his identity and ate a meal with that young man at the Ning Palace, His Majesty, who never had much of an appetite, could eat a lot of food in front of him. His Majesty was right. That young man was a weirdo through and through. "The ambassador from the Qi kingdom hasn't left yet?" Emperor Jing casually asked. Changde said, "No. The third prince of the Qi kingdom is staying at the Honglu temple. He strolls around the capital every day and even visits brothels a few times. However, he hasn't done anything else. I heard that the third prince of the Qi kingdom is good at both literature and martial arts. He is very outstanding among the princes of the Qi kingdom. However, since he hasn't done anything, let him be," Emperor Jing said. When he was about to walk back into the hall with his hands behind his back, there was a sudden noise coming from the corridor on the side. Changde frowned slightly. Recently, The concubines in the palace had been addicted to the perfume. However, County Magistrate Li had told His Majesty to stay as far away from that thing as possible. Changde naturally wouldn't let those concubines get close to His Majesty. These days, he had stopped many of them. Imperial father, Imperial father. This time, it was obviously not a concubine. Princess Xiaofan pushed away 2 guards and trotted over to Emperor Jing. She said happily, "Imperial father, why are you here?" "It took Xiaofan a long time to find you." Emperor Jing touched her head lovingly and said, "What's wrong? Do you want to go out of the palace to play with your brother Xian again?" Xiaofan blushed and said, "Imperial father, I'm not as playful as you think. Besides, brother Xian isn't playing. He is making something that is very useful to the Jing kingdom." Emperor Jing smiled and said, "Well, Imperial father is busy. Tell me, what are you looking for me for?" "Oh, I almost forgot." Princess Xiaofan heard this and immediately waved to the back. She said, "Bring it here quickly." Then she turned to look at Emperor Jing with a smile and said, "Imperial father, I just made soup. If you're tired of reading the memorials, you can have a taste." Soup. When Emperor Jing heard this, he seemed to think of something terrible. His expression immediately changed and he hurriedly said, "Xiaofan, Imperial father still has a few important memorials to read. You can go play first. Leave the soup there. Imperial father will drink it later." Looking at Emperor Jing striding into the hall, Princess Xiaofan looked a little disappointed. Then she seemed to think of something. She turned to look at Changde and said, "The soup won't taste good when it's cold. Chief Steward Chong, you must be tired of serving Imperial father. Why don't you try it?" Even as a first-class master in the world, he could face a martial arts master head-on. But in the face of Princess Xiaofan's soup, the face of the #1 master in the palace immediately changed. "Wait, I'll go and get it for you." Princess Xiaofan ran to the palace maid who was holding the tray. When she turned back to talk to Changde, she found that the opposite side was empty. The door of the Hall of Diligent Government was closed and a cloud of dust was spreading in front of her eyes. "Who is it?" After a while, Princess Xiaofan realized what had happened. She pouted and said discontentedly, "I practiced several times according to teacher's instructions." Chapter 400. As a viscount who was both important and insignificant, Li Yi's departure didn't have much impact on the capital. The biggest change he had made in the capital was to make all the females in the capital crazy. The appearance of perfume and the expansion of production made him the man behind the back of countless young girls and young women in the capital. It also made countless men gnash their teeth in hatred. Because of the high price of perfume, the speed at which new perfume was introduced was astonishing. Even if it was the same perfume, it could be put in different porcelain bottles of different sizes, and even the name could be different. As for those crazy fans, they wouldn't stop until they collected all the series of gifts given to women by the heavens. It was fine for those who were well off, but those who were a bit shy would naturally hate perfume to the extreme. Of course, this kind of hatred was often reduced a lot when they smelled the nice fragrance of their wives, especially at a special, harmonious moment. The effect of perfume was too obvious. The emperor's concubines were also women, and women couldn't resist the temptation of perfume. The direct result was that the emperor only stayed in the palace of the empress and concubine Yen for 2 whole months, because in the entire harem, only the empress and concubine Yen didn't use perfume. As for the other concubines, His Majesty wouldn't look for them anyway, so the result would be the same whether they used perfume or not. Of course, the most important thing was to be happy. Because of Li Yi's departure, the princes and princesses in the palace could finally get rid of those obscure numbers and symbols and completely let themselves go. Among them, Prince Jean was the most successful. At most, the other princes were more lively than before. Prince Jean, who was tortured by the mathematics teacher, waited for 2 months, but the hateful mathematics teacher didn't come back. Finally, like a wild dog or a pig that got out of the fence, he not only tore the mathematics textbook to pieces and burned it, but also pinched Yongning's face as revenge. Although Yongning would never fight back made him feel very unfulfilled, when he thought about how he was targeted because he bullied Yongning, how he was hung on the stage because he couldn't write an answer, and how he lost face in front of his brothers and sisters, Prince Jean felt that everything was meaningful. The naive young man obviously didn't have a long-term plan, and he didn't know that the nightmare he thought had not ended, but had not yet begun. Until many years later, when the dean of the Institute of Mathematics of the Jinghua Academy of Sciences,
who once fought against all the PhD students in the Imperial College of Mathematics without losing, loudly said, "I'm not saying that you are garbage, I mean, everyone here is garbage." This classic sentence, when Prince Jean recalled his childhood, he still couldn't forget the fear of being dominated by mathematics. Viscount Mansion. Eeyore and Rui have been gone for 2 months. Why aren't they back yet? The old lady of the Li family was sitting in the yard with a needle and thread in her hand. She was making a small dress. The blind old lady of the He family also looked a little envious and said, "If only I had been blinded a little later, I would have been able to see what they look like. I would have been able to make clothes for their children like my old sister." The old lady of the Li family smiled and said, "I'm also idle. While I can still see, I'll make a few more. I missed the child 20 years ago, and I can't miss it this time." The old lady of the He family nodded and said, "I have nothing to think about in my life. I just want to see Yunyong's child have a child as soon as possible. At that time, even if I die, I can close my eyes well." The two old ladies chatted while basking in the sun. Naturally, the topic was Li Yi and Rui, or their children. A little farther away from the two old ladies, in a place with better sunlight, a kind-looking old man was lying on a rocking chair. His face showed a comfortable expression, and he snorted slightly from time to time. In the accounting room, Uncle Li was calculating the accounts one by one. Now, he was able to maintain his composure in the face of the huge numbers. He thought to himself that at this rate, it wouldn't be long before the family would have to build another house to store the money. Outside the mansion, Fong was supervising the craftsmen to build houses. More than a dozen houses that were about to be completed were scattered on both sides of the Viscount mansion. He looked around and found that no craftsmen were slacking off. He casually sat on the stone steps at the door with a depressed expression on his face. More than a month ago, after he came to the capital from Qing and Mansion with everyone, he learned that the son-in-law and the young lady had returned to Qing and Mansion. For more than a month, he had been doing these boring things every day, and his heart was really depressed. Zhu Zi secretly ate sweets and broke his teeth. All day long, his cheeks were swollen, and he cried for his parents. His wife at home now forbade him to eat candied haws again. Several women discussed and soon moved the candied haws business to the streets of the capital. Now every day was busy, and only he was relatively idle. He began to miss the old days. Even if he ran up and down the mountain every day, selling Rui nectar, and playing with the terrifying things with the son-in-law to kill the outlaws, it was still much more interesting than his current life. Of course, after coming to the capital, he would never be able to see Miss Xiao Hong again. Old Fong let out a long sigh and stared blankly at the azure sky. The pure white clouds gradually transformed into the appearance of a round-faced woman. Yuezhou was one of the provinces of the Jing Kingdom. It was famous for its dangerous mountains and rivers, and it was next to Qing and Mansion. At this time, on the official road from Yuezhou to Qing and Mansion, a carriage was slowly moving forward. The driver was a young woman. She was dressed in a tight outfit and leaned against the carriage. In her hands, she was holding a strange picture book that she bought when she passed by a place. However, she did not flip through it for a long time. Her pretty face revealed a hint of laziness as she listened to the sounds coming from inside the carriage. The inside of the carriage was very spacious. It should be quite spacious for 4 or 5 people to sit inside. At this time, a young woman with 2 buns of hair was resting her cheeks in her hands as she listened to the mysterious stories of sword immortals flying on swords. Bang! A muffled sound suddenly rang out. In the middle of the road, a thick tree trunk blocked the road, sending up a cloud of dust. The woman's eyebrows slightly moved. She put down the picture book in her hands and looked forward. Not long after, a rustling sound came from the side of the dense forest. Immediately, a strong man wearing coarse hemp clothes jumped out from the side and blocked the front of the carriage. He fiercely said, "This mountain was planted by me." Bah! This mountain was planted by me. This tree. The expression on the burly man's face was a little awkward. This was the first time he had done something like this. He was illiterate, and he had to ask several people before he managed to ask about the official language of robbery. However, at this most important moment, he was so nervous that he completely forgot about it. This mountain was planted by me. This tree was planted by me. If you want to pass through, you have to pay for the road. The woman in the tight outfit jumped down from the carriage and glared at the man. She crossed her arms and reminded him.
The man's face revealed a look of realization.
He slapped his forehead and said loudly, "Yes, this mountain was planted by me.
This tree is mine. It's me. What's mine again?" You're tuning in to the Xiaofan's Wuxia Tales YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.